In a casual conversation at the tavern, a warrior asks his companion if he knows about the famous unbeatable SSS-rank dungeon. The other replies instantly, saying it is impossible for anyone to have never heard of that place. He explains that legendary top-tier adventurers have already tried to clear the dungeon, but they all failed miserably. After all, no one has even managed to reach the middle floors, and rumors say the most powerful monster of all time rules the bottom of the dungeon as the grand boss. While rumors claim that even the hero's party is in there trying their luck, outside the immense tower, a group of warriors discovers they cannot even enter the dungeon. Outraged by the situation, one of them vents his frustration by punching the wall, complaining that the actual difficulty is way worse than the rumors led them to believe. The reason for such outrage is a system notice blocking their entry because they do not meet the absurd requirement of level 999. Faced with such a surreal demand for that SSS-rank dungeon, the adventurers give up on the spot and decide to fall back. Watching from afar, a horned monster smiles with satisfaction, seeing that yet another party failed before even stepping inside and left. He scoffs, commenting that even if they managed to enter, the invaders would still have to push through the entire monster army, guarding the place. With a determined look, the monster guarantees that no one will ever reach their boss. At the bottom of the dungeon, the boss himself thanks his subordinates for their support, but reflects on the true nature of that place. As it turns out, this max-level dungeon is called Prometheus's Tower of Twilight, and inside it, the young boss Tensisha does everything he can to protect his fellow monsters. Before all this, the Prota used to think that 21st century modern society was just a terrible, unfair game where people are constantly evaluated and boxed into categories. To him, human life boiled down to school, academic, and corporate ranks, where those at the top are idolized and those at the bottom are completely looked down upon. The young man felt that trying to level up in real life was the equivalent of playing on the most insane difficulty mode there is. He even tried to convince himself that accepting his current position would make things easier, but the truth was quite different. This depressed young man is named Imamura Hatoya, and he could not see any happiness in his future if he kept living that way forever. Completely exhausted while walking down the street, he suddenly hears a strange noise and looks to the side, confused. With no time to react, Hatoya ends up getting hit full-on by a huge truck right in the middle of the crosswalk. Sometime later, he begins to regain consciousness in the deep darkness, wondering where he ended up. Looking down to brace himself, the young man gets a shock as he notices his hand has turned into pure bone. He panics completely, unable to understand what happened to his skeletal fingers. But the despair only grows when he realizes this bizarre change is not limited to just his arms. Looking at his own body, Hatoya discovers he has become a full skeleton and is now a level 5 undead. Facing the floating screen, he wonders if he somehow ended up inside a video game. That is when he remembers getting hit by that truck, and tries to make sense of this mysterious place where he woke up. Right after, a new system notification reveals that he is now in an F-rank dungeon called the Forest Cemetery. While trying to process all this, Hatoya hears a very high-pitched whimpering nearby. The sudden noise puts the skeleton on high alert, making him quite afraid of what might pop out. To his surprise, the sound was coming from an extremely cute level 1 wolf pup, staring up at him with curiosity. Hatoya freezes, staring back at the tiny creature, not quite knowing how to react. Sweating nervously, the skeleton timidly asks if the little wolf has any intention of eating him. Instead of attacking, the little creature simply takes a joyful leap toward the young man. The pup begins to rub and nuzzle affectionately against Hatoya's bones. Relieved, the young man realizes the tiny creature is completely harmless and relaxes a bit. Suddenly, a strange rustling from the bushes catches the skeleton's attention, cutting the peaceful moment short. The wind blows hard through the trees of the empty clearing, bringing an eerie sense of imminent danger. Moments before the danger shows itself, the young man was still thinking to himself that this new place might not be so bad after all. However, the little wolf's ears perk up immediately as it detects that something is approaching way too fast. A red alert pops up out of nowhere, warning that a dungeon challenger has been detected nearby. Hatoya is confused by the term challenger, while the pup begins to whimper in terror. Looking to the side, the skeleton notices the little wolf is trembling with fear over something hidden in the woods. Hidden among the leaves, a hunter aims his crossbow in their direction, celebrating that he found prey so early on. Sensing the hostile presence, Hatoya turns around, startled, trying to find out who is there. Before he can do anything, an arrow flies at high speed and strikes the young man right in the forehead. With the violent impact of the shot, the skeletal body collapses lifelessly onto the forest floor. The little wolf cries out in despair as another arrow grazes past him. Unfortunately, both end up quickly defeated and lie side by side on the grass. With the arrow lodged in his skull, The prota just mutters in frustration before completely losing consciousness. Heavy footsteps begin to move away from the site of the recent attack. One of the hunters remarks with disdain that they secured another easy batch of materials that day, leaving the bodies behind. Gradually, Hitoya's consciousness begins to return as he tries to understand what is happening. He vaguely remembers a terrifying figure reaching a hand out toward him and wonders if that really was the end of him. The silence of the forest is broken by the little wolf's faint whimpers, which soon turn into a joyful bark upon seeing the skeleton move. Hitoya wakes up dazed, rubbing his head, unable to believe he is still conscious after everything. Analyzing his hands, which are intact once again, the young man begins to question where reality ends and where this bizarre nightmare of being undead begins. As the little wolf rubs affectionately against his fingers, Hitoya realizes the pain he felt was no dream, and that he really did perish moments ago. He remembers with horror that, before his mind went completely blank, he witnessed the hunters brutally skinning the cute little creature. In that gruesome scene, the humans gathered the little wolf's remains, and even pulled out its tiny fangs without an ounce of mercy. The memory of blood dripping from the sharp knife of those cruel adventurers burns in the skeleton's mind. He recalls with disgust the exact moment they flaunted the pup's tooth, as if it were a valuable trophy. The victorious silhouette of the hunter, holding the hunting spoils, continues to haunt Hitoya's thoughts. To make matters worse, he remembers the warrior commenting that undead monster ribs also fetched a good price on the black market. And right after, the terrible sensation of having his own bones forcefully torn from his chest floods his memory. Back in the present, the young skeleton begins to shake violently as he relives the indescribable pain of that moment. To his absolute despair, the glowing system warning appears once again in the clearing, announcing the approach of a new challenger. Hitoya panics, realizing that more humans are arriving at the dungeon so quickly. Terrified of the idea of being brutally taken down again, his only reaction is to think of a place to hide immediately. Just then, he sees the little wolf cowering behind a tree, trembling just as much as he is in the face of the impending danger. Without a second thought, Hitoya pulls the startled pup close and tells him they are going to run away together. In the distance, he spots the dragon mark drawn on the skin of the new adventurers who have just arrived. While the hunters laugh and talk about how this F-rank dungeon is ridiculously easy, Hitoya begins to connect the dots and realizes he truly reincarnated into a fantasy world that operates like a game. He watches those arrogant humans with contempt and wonders why this kind of otherworldly trash had to be his opponent. The skeleton cannot accept that such deplorable people are the grand challengers of this place. Unaware of his presence, the invaders comment that the low-level dungeon is perfect for hunting easy monsters to use as ingredients to boost stamina. The archer smiles maliciously and says the perfect plan is to butcher some weak monsters to blow off steam before going out to have fun in the city's entertainment district tonight. His companion agrees with a loud laugh, stating he would never skip out on this highly profitable and entertaining daily hunt. Hiding, Hitoya laments his terrible luck, since he always read in manga that reincarnated individuals get overpowered skills to become heroes, but he ended up as just an ordinary dungeon monster. He despairs upon realizing he became the weakest monster of all, treated as mere easy farming material by cruel humans. He is now just another insignificant target on the adventurer's hunting list. Worse still is knowing that the dungeon revives monsters infinitely, preventing him from ever finding eternal rest. Toya realizes with horror that he is trapped in a true eternal underworld where pain and defeat repeat endlessly. However, the sudden sound of twigs snapping interrupts his dark thoughts. He looks at the pup in his arms and realizes, with deep empathy, that this little creature has also been suffering through this same cruel cycle of torment for a very long time. Suddenly, one of the hunters appears from above, delivering a devastating sword strike toward their hiding spot. The blade grazes past and tears up the ground, causing the terrified little wolf to whimper in fear. Hitoya dashes away in a panic with the pup in his arms, cursing mentally because they were found out so easily. The warrior looks back in surprise, wondering what kind of bizarre anomaly is going on here. He calls out to his companion, telling him he found an unusual skeleton that actually knows how to run. With a sarcastic smirk, the archer readies his weapon and says it does not matter how it moves, since it will still go down if it gets hit. Multiple energy arrows are fired toward Hitoya as he desperately tries to escape with the pup. Amid the frantic flight, the young man falls into absolute despair, realizing he is about to relive all that terrible agony once more. The attack catches him from behind, shattering his bones and tearing a cry of pain from the skeleton. The little wolf is also hit by the impact and ends up thrown across the clearing. Both roll heavily injured across the ground, completely defenseless against the continuous barrage. Down and out of strength, Hitoya groans in pain as he feels his life quickly slipping away once again. He looks to the side and sees the little pup bleeding on the grass, taking its last painful breaths. Overcome by overwhelming anguish, the young man lets out a silent scream of pure torment before blacking out. Seeing the fallen bodies, the hunters approach, mocking the monster's weakness, and commenting on how clearing F-rank dungeons is an absurdly easy task. The hunter approaches with heavy steps, ready to collect the loot from that easy hunt. Without a shred of remorse, he decides he will start by carving up the little wolf pup lying on the grass. The warrior draws his sharp weapon to begin the cruel work of harvesting materials. However, the archer is caught off guard as he sees a mysterious blue mist begin to emanate from the defeated skeleton's body. With his eyes glowing intensely amid the energy, Hitoya rises again and coldly warns them that he will not let them touch the pup. He realizes that if hunters keep invading this place just because it is a weak dungeon that is easy to plunder, things will never change. With a burning new determination, the young skeleton decides he will transform this cemetery into a dungeon impossible for any human to conquer. At that exact moment, an urgent system message triggers, announcing that a secret quest has been activated, and the true dungeon boss has just manifested. Hitoya remembers how, in his past life on Earth, he always lived believing that insignificant people like him did not matter, and that certain realities were simply impossible to change. But now, faced with this cruelty, he feels an uncontrollable urge to change himself and fight against that tragic fate. An overwhelming flash of light engulfs the entire clearing, leaving the hunters completely blinded and startled by what is happening. A monster evolution alert pops up on the system screen as Hitoya feels an absurd amount of divine energy surge through his entire body. His bones begin to rebuild and crystallize under the influence of an immense magical power. When the light finally fades, the evolution finishes, revealing that Hitoya now possesses a striking humanoid form, with glowing eyes and blue energy markings. The warrior is shocked to see that the undead's face looks perfectly human, and questions if a common monster is really capable of evolving that way. The archer tries to maintain his stance and jeers, reminding him that this is just an F-rank dungeon, and that, even after evolving, a trash monster is still trash. Confident, they decide they are going to fill the young man with arrows, and then carry out the plan to eliminate the wolf pup, to sell its pelt. With a cold, focused gaze, Hitoya charges forward at a surreal speed, repeating that he will not let them do any harm to his little friend. The hunters blink in panic as they realize the monster has simply vanished from their line of sight. Before they can react, Hitoya comes down from above like a lightning bolt, dropping directly onto the invaders. With a single devastating move, he strikes the archer full on, slamming him violently against the ground. The warrior watches it all breaking into a cold sweat, unable to process the absurd strength and speed they just witnessed. Furious and terrified, he brandishes his sword and charges at the proto with a cry of pure desperation. However, in a fraction of a second, the warrior's metal sword is sliced in half as if it were made of paper. Hitoya appears calmly right behind him, showing that he destroyed the weapon without the slightest effort. The piercing gaze of the evolved young skeleton makes it clear that the battle is already completely decided. Shaking and at a loss, the hunter realizes with horror that the monster used only its own tail to slice through his reinforced steel sword. The archer gets up staggering and screams in anger, promising he will blow that cursed monster away once and for all. Blinded by hatred, he draws his bowstring with all the strength he has left to unleash a fatal attack. Realizing his companion's foolishness and the actual danger of the situation, the warrior takes advantage of the distraction to bolt and escape from there alone. The archer fires a violent volley of magic arrows, screaming for the proto to shut up and just go down. But the smile on the hunter's face vanishes instantly when he sees the result of his desperate attack. All the arrows simply shatter upon colliding with Hitoya's energy barrier, without leaving even a single scratch on his body. The archer freezes in terror upon seeing that the system now identifies the young man as the powerful dungeon boss, Tensisha. Hitoya looks down at the invader and, with a commanding voice, coldly orders them to never dare set foot in this place again. Overcome by absolute panic, the hunter begins to scramble backward, screaming desperately that they are going to get finished off if they stay there. The two survivors flee in a mad dash toward the exit, shouting that defeating that monster is a completely impossible task. Watching the invaders try to escape, Hitoya extends his hand and commands the immediate closure of the dungeon gate. The archer looks back, shocked to hear the deafening noise of the immense stone structure starting to move. The selfish warrior runs with all his might to cross the exit before it is too late. The man manages to get through at the last second, leaving his companion behind in a cowardly manner. Desperate to see the exit close before his eyes, the archer begs in tears for the gate not to shut. Outside, the warrior keeps running without looking back, thinking only of saving his own skin. The immense stone gate closes ruthlessly, trapping the archer in the darkness of the dungeon, as he lets out a final cry of despair. With the complete closure of the entrance, silence and peace finally return to the forest cemetery. Hitoya deactivates his combat aura, and his eyes return to a soft, calm expression. He looks at his own hands, still unable to believe he actually managed to defeat those cruel hunters and defend the place. The young man soon kneels on the grass and focuses all his attention on the little wolf pup that remains down and lifeless. He begins to worry for real, wondering if the little wolf will actually revive this time, or if it ended up gone for good. To the young man's immediate relief, a soft golden light begins to envelop the pup's tiny body, indicating that the dungeon's resurrection process has finally begun. Hitoya watches the scene in surprise, seeing his little friend's body begin to float amidst the glow. He notices with astonishment that beams of magical light are rising directly from the forest floor. To his immense joy, the energy dissipates, revealing the little wolf completely healed and letting out a happy bark. Relieved, the young skeleton extends his arms and celebrates the return of his dungeon companion. He hugs the pup affectionately, thanking him from the bottom of his heart for coming back safe and sound. However, in the next instant, the young man snaps back to reality and stares at his own reflection with a completely frozen expression. Hitoya panics as he notices he now has a massive reptile tail and that only his face has human skin, while the rest of his body remains skeletal and covered in black armor. While the little wolf plays happily by biting his new tail, a system window begins to flicker unstable before him. Focusing on the screen, the young man sees his updated information and discovers that his rank is now that of the dungeon boss, known as Tensisha. He is completely stunned by the revelation, unable to understand how he ended up in the position of supreme leader of that place. Meanwhile, at the Ryo Shizoku gang hideout in the eastern capital, the cowardly hunter who managed to escape reports desperately that an extremely powerful dungeon boss has awakened in the F-rank cemetery. Shaking with terror, he insists that the undead evolved into something way out of the ordinary, and that they will need even a dragon if they want to defeat it. The gang's vice leader, Gulden, scoffed at the situation while relaxing with his companions, saying it is a tremendous embarrassment to fail in such a weak dungeon. Suddenly, a colossal shadow looms over the room, and a commanding voice mocks their incompetence for being unable to handle even the weakest monsters in the region. The surviving hunter begins to stammer in terror as he notices the intimidating presence of the grand boss of the Ryo Shizoku gang right behind them. Without giving any chance for an explanation, the supreme leader executes the failed subordinate right then and there, labeling him as someone completely useless to the group. With blood-stained hands, the powerful leader turns to Gulden and asks if he was not the one responsible for constantly plundering that dungeon. Breaking into a cold sweat before his superior's fury, Gulden confirms immediately that he was. The leader then orders them to eliminate every last wolf in that cemetery and take the opportunity to test the two-headed dragon they recently bought in combat. He adds with disdain that even if a boss has awakened, an F-rank dungeon is still trash and must be totally wiped out. Giving the final order to advance, the leader points toward the cage where the monstrous creature is locked up. Gulden approaches the cage with a cruel smile and warns the creature that it is just a tool and must prove itself useful on the hunt. Trapped behind the iron bars, the glowing eyes of the young two-headed monster stare at the man with deep resentment. Noticing the hostility, the villain gets irritated by the beast's defiant look and stomps hard on the ground to intimidate it. He thinks to himself that, in their world, tools that lose their usefulness are discarded without mercy, carved up, and sold to the highest bidder. Gulden warns them once more that they need to prove their own worth if they want to stay alive after this mission. Back at the forest cemetery, Hitoya walks calmly with the little wolf on his shoulder, trying to familiarize himself with the dungeon environment. Looking out at the vast, green expanse around him, he estimates that the place is about the size of a football stadium, and looks like a setting of ancient ruins covered by nature. The young man notices that the place is quite different from the dark, terrifying dungeons he used to see in games. Given the calmness, he decides that the best option at the moment is to explore the deeper paths of the forest. As he advances through the trees, the silence of the woods begins to be punctured by tiny noises. Hitoya notes that the dense vegetation gives off a feeling of pure, untouched nature, but he knows that, because it is a dungeon, there must be other creatures inhabiting that region besides them. His thoughts are interrupted when the little wolf on his shoulder lets out a happy bark toward the bushes. The young man goes on alert as he realizes something really is moving in the middle of the foliage right ahead. He stops walking immediately, focused on the spot where the noise is coming from. Hitoya leaps back, startled, as the thickets begin to shake violently. To his surprise, a second wolf pup leaps happily out of the brush, leaving the prota confused. He is left open-mouthed upon realizing he just found another inhabitant identical to his little friend. Suddenly, the noise in the leaves multiplies from every direction around the young man. Within moments, dozens of level 1 wolf pups emerge from the shadows, surrounding Hitoya with curious and cute gazes. The young man shouts in astonishment at the impressive number of little creatures that appeared out of nowhere. Seeing all of them playing and jumping around happily, he thinks that calling them wolves isn't stretch, since they look just like helpless puppies. While watching the pups have fun, a strange glow coming from behind a large tree catches his attention. Hitoya walks over there curiously, wondering if that greenish light is natural to the forest. Rounding the trunk, he lets out a breath of admiration at the beautiful sight that reveals itself. The young man discovers a massive patch of glowing mushrooms and is fascinated by the magical atmosphere of the place. As he focuses his vision on the plants, system screens appear, revealing that they are just common level 1 mushrooms. Surrounded by his new pack of pups, Hitoya crouches down to analyze the luminous plants up close, wondering if they are just dungeon decorations. However, an unexpected detail on the mushrooms makes the young man change his expression instantly. Hitoya observes the pup next to one of the mushrooms, and notices that both are identified by the system as level 1. He concludes, somewhat shocked, that the strength of those little wolves is equivalent to that of a simple forest mushroom. Walking a bit further, the young man realizes that the only monsters in that entire dungeon are just about 30 helpless wolf pups. It becomes evident to him that only extremely weak creatures inhabit that F-rank cemetery. Looking at the Grand Gate, Hitoya understands that the minimum level 1 entry requirement is precisely why the hunters exploit this place so much. He remembers with bitterness how the monsters were hunted and cruelly slaughtered for pure entertainment and human greed. Overcome by a strong sense of justice, the young man focuses his gaze on the little wolf, determined not to let that tragedy happen again. The tiny pup stares back at him with its big bright eyes full of innocence. Suddenly, the little wolf gives a startled jump, making Hitoya wonder what happened to him all of a sudden. But the little creature just wanted to rub itself in an extremely affectionate way against its new protector's leg. The young man looks at the pup with tenderness, feeling his heart warm up at that affectionate gesture. Seeing the whole pack approach and snuggle around him, he smiles as he realizes how comforting and warm the touch of those tiny creatures is. He laments that while hunters see them only as disposable farming materials, to him, those pups are real living beings. With a heart full of affection, Hitoya makes a solemn commitment to protect every single one of them with all his might. He sits on the grass and enjoys the moment surrounded by the small puppies, jumping and playing around him. However, the young man knows that hanging around near the dungeon's entry gate is far too dangerous for the pups. Thinking of everyone's safety, he calls the pack and suggests they head back into the shelter of the dense forest. Hitoya picks up the first little wolf in his arms and tells them they are going to take cover in a much deeper part of the cemetery. He knows that if new hunters invade the dungeon, the little creatures will be easy targets and will end up wiped out from a distance without a chance to defend themselves. But his thoughts are cut short when a red light suddenly flashes in the corner of his vision. A tense system warning flashes before him, alerting that new challengers have just crossed the dungeon gate. Hitoya complains indignantly about not having even a moment of peace before the arrival of new enemies. He turns toward the monumental entrance and watches the gate begin to swing open, while the system alert keeps blaring. Outside, the new hunter's voice brutally orders the two-headed dragon to advance and attack the targets. Hitoya turns around in absolute shock as he senses a colossal dark presence rapidly dropping right toward him. He is left open-mouthed as he comes face to face with a massive level 51 two-headed dragon soaring over the clearing. Next, the level 35 hunter, Gul'dan, enters the dungeon laughing out loud and comments that the rumors about a boss appearing were actually true. Hitoya steps back tensely upon noting that, besides the high-level dragon, he will have to face yet another ruthless thug from the gang. Wasting no time, Gul'dan snaps his fingers and orders his beast to eliminate the dungeon boss immediately. The massive winged monster dives from the sky at high speed, ready to deliver a fatal blow. Knowing the danger, Hitoya shouts for all the pups to run as fast as they can to the deep end of the forest. He is forced to leap to the side to dodge the devastating attack of the dragon's claws, which smashes the ground where he just stood. But looking back, the young man falls into despair upon seeing that the little wolves are frozen in terror and crying, unable to flee. Hitoya begins to sweat nervously, wondering if he will be able to manage protecting so many innocent lives all by himself against a threat like that. The fear of failing grips his chest as he faces the monster in front of him. He remembers the terrible pain of being hunted and the image of the tiny pup being mutilated, realizing that all of it will happen again if he loses. This painful memory makes the young man regain his focus and reaffirm that he is the only one who can guarantee his pack's survival. Suddenly, the first little wolf takes a brave step forward, barking with determination against the invaders. Hitoya looks back in surprise at the little pup's attitude in the face of danger. Growling with all its might, the little wolf shows its tiny teeth and tries to intimidate the giant creature threatening them. Inspired by their companion's courage, all the other pups run to position themselves by Hitoya's side, resolved to fight together. Even trembling, and with tears in their eyes, the tiny creatures refuse to abandon their savior. They remember Hitoya's sacrifice to defend them previously, and now want to return that loyalty. The pack's little leader assumes a fierce stance, ready to face whatever comes their way. Deeply touched by the pup's loyalty, Hitoya flashes a gentle smile and thanks his little companions for their support. Seeing the scene, Gildan lets out a hysterical laugh and scoffs, saying the hunt gets way more fun when the prey tries to resist. Hitoya ignites his blue magical combat aura and warns the thug that he will not let any of them touch the little wolves. With a sarcastic smirk, the hunter manipulates his magical chains of pink energy and comments that the prey seems to be quite bold. He threatens the dragon's 2 heads, ordering them to show some useful power if they do not want to be discarded and taken down like trash. Obeying the cruel command, one of the beast's heads opens its gigantic maw and begins to charge an immense sphere of destructive energy right toward Hitoya. It all starts when a system warning pops up on the screen, announcing that the 2-headed dragon's special skill has been activated. Hitoya is confused and surprised to realize that monsters can also use special combat techniques. With no time to think, one of the beast's heads unleashes a powerful blast of blue flames directly at the young man. The young man is quick and manages to evade the devastating attack by leaping to the side at the last second. But when he looks back to see the impact, he notices something very strange happening to the ground. Hitoya is shocked to see that the creature's blue flames actually froze the ground instantly. He realizes on the spot that he is not facing ordinary fire, but rather an extreme freezing magic. While he tries to move away from the frozen area, the hunter Gildan is already preparing to strike from behind. Just then, another system screen flashes, warning that the dragon's second head has also activated its skill. A stream of blazing red flames is unleashed at Hitoya, forcing him to leap high to escape the deadly heat. The young man takes cover behind a boulder, sweating nervously at the overwhelming power of the attack. He is perplexed to look to the side and see that the heat from that blow was so absurd that it completely melted the earth. Observing the beast's 2 heads in the sky, Hitoya tries to understand how these mysterious powers work. He concludes that these abilities are exactly like the special moves he used to see in video games. It becomes clear to the young man that one of the heads possesses the freezing flame technique, while the other controls melting fire. At that moment, he wonders if the thug commanding the beast also hides some special ability. He realizes that if even the enemies have these special powers, there is a chance he might have gained one himself. To his surprise, the system confirms his suspicions and shows that he has a skill available to use. Hitoya gets excited upon seeing the notice that activating his special technique is already possible. While running to dodge the aerial attacks, he tries to find out what exactly his power is. The screen reveals that his skill is called Rebirth, allowing him to revive and absorb the powers of defeated opponents. The young man is completely shocked by how overpowered and packed with potential that incredible new power is. But he is snapped out of his thoughts by Gildan's furious shout, demanding that he pay attention to the battle. The thug aims his crossbow and fires a volley of purple energy arrows directly at the prota. The projectiles slice through the air swiftly, covering any possibility of the young man dodging. However, Hitoya is startled to notice that the arrows simply vanish out of nowhere mid-flight. He is caught off guard by tiny invisible impacts that almost hit him full on. Gildan smiles sadistically as he activates his special skill, commenting that his prey is quite agile. With this, the prota realizes that the shooter's power is already active, making the fight much more dangerous. He notices the arrows lodged around him and understands that they become invisible right after being fired. Using his enhanced reflexes, Hitoya executes acrobatic leaps to escape the hidden projectiles. He deduces that he needs to focus on tracking the exact moment the arrows vanish to manage defeating the shooter first. The young man charges forward at high speed, while the battlefield is battered by explosions of ice and fire coming from the sky. Gildan laughs loudly and keeps shooting without stopping, daring the young man to keep running to save his life. Hitoya moves like a blur in an attempt to dodge every treacherous attack coming his way. Suddenly, a sharp whimper of pain echoes through the clearing, catching the young man's immediate attention. Looking to the side, he is shocked to see that one of Gildan's stray arrows ended up hitting his own dragon. Instead of worrying, the hunter calls the beast an idiot and commands it to get up right away, threatening to stuff it if it keeps being useless. Wounded and frightened, the 2-headed dragon just trembles before its master's extreme cruelty. Hitoya gets extremely outraged by that cold attitude and questions how he can treat his own ally that way. Gildan just mocks his indignation and replies with disdain that monsters will never be anyone's allies. The thug explains without any remorse that those creatures are just disposable tools for humans to use and throw away. He bursts out laughing, while the poor injured beast cries softly from the pain of the wound. Hearing those cruel words makes Hitoya reflect on the sad reality of the monsters that are hunted in that world. He remembers how humans usually mistreat, break, and discard these beings without a second thought. However, the young man refuses to accept that twisted logic, remembering the sincere affection he received from his pups. He focuses his gaze on the hurt two-headed dragon, which suffers under the oppression of those energy chains. At that instant, a glow appears before the frightened eyes of the large, injured creature. Gildan notices that something is wrong on the battlefield and gets confused. With a commanding stance and surrounded by power, Hitoya reemerges, ready to step in and change the course of that fight. In the blink of an eye, Hitoya appears right in front of Gildan, leaving the hunter completely frozen in terror. With a furious glare, the young man shouts that he does not see monsters as simple disposable tools and readies a devastating blow. He delivers an extremely powerful upward punch, striking the opponent's weapon full on. Gildan falls into despair, as he realizes both his crossbow and the dragon's control collar were destroyed in a single second. Hitoya turns calmly and asks with disdain what the thug intends to do now that he has lost his trump card. The hunter gulps, not knowing how to react in front of the prota's overwhelming strength. Desperate, he backs away and screams frantically for the dragon's heads to attack the young man and protect their master. Free from the control chains that imprisoned them, the monster's two heads look at each other, confused. The hunter rants even louder, demanding that the creature move immediately to defend him. He begins to insult them hysterically, calling them useless trash and threatening to slice them up if they do not obey. However, the two heads slowly rise into the air with dark, glowing eyes focused right on Gildan himself. One of the heads opens its maw, charging an immense amount of freezing energy. The thug senses the impending danger and begins to shake with terror, begging for it to just be a joke. Without any hesitation, the monster unleashes the powerful freezing blast with full force right at him. Gildan screams in frustration and hatred as his body is quickly consumed by the relentless ice. The creature observes with seriousness the punishment it just dealt to its former torturer. Within moments, the hunter is turned into a completely solid ice statue in the middle of the battlefield. A system message appears on the screen right after, confirming that the level 35 invader failed to clear the dungeon. Right after, the notice that the activation of Hitoya's special skill is ready flashes before the young man's eyes. He recalls that his rebirth technique serves to obtain the powers of defeated enemies and realizes the conditions have been met. Wasting no time, the young man decides to activate his new special power with determination. The system processes the action and announces that the collection of stealth shot, known as Phantom Strike, has been successfully completed. Hitoya's body glows intensely as he completely absorbs the ability that previously belonged to Gildan. He is marveled to see that his true power is stealing the techniques of the invaders who failed to defeat him. Suddenly, the dragon's two heads give a startled jump upon noticing the young man approaching. Still wary due to past traumas, they growl softly and assume a defensive stance. Hitoya stares at them with a serene and understanding look, without showing any sign of hostility. He raises his hands slowly to calm the beasts and gently asks them to wait a moment. To the creature's total surprise, the young man bows humbly and apologizes for scaring them during the fight. With a docile expression, he calmly explains that he has absolutely no intention of fighting them. He humorously acknowledges that, to them, he must look like just a bizarre and incomprehensible dungeon monster. At that instant, a grand and imposing new golden screen appears before Hitoya, revealing an exclusive dungeon boss skill. The young man is intrigued, since he had never seen that type of golden system window before. The panel explains that the technique allows adding new monsters to officially inhabit and defend the forest cemetery. Hitoya exclaims in surprise, realizing he just gained a second special skill out of nowhere. He reads the description carefully and tries to process the idea of being able to recruit creatures to be part of his dungeon. A confirmation message flashes, asking if he would like to register the level 51 two-headed dragon as a protector of the area. The young man gets excited about the real possibility of turning those two winged creatures into official allies of his dungeon. The system reveals that the name of this second exclusive boss power is Spirit Guardian's Blessing. Hitoya realizes that by using it, he will be able to give a safe new home to the dragon, far away from cruel hunters. He knows that having such powerful allies with ice and fire blasts would be a massive defensive reinforcement to protect the pups. But he hesitates for a moment. The young man ponders that this weak dungeon will continue to be a constant target for new greedy invaders. He looks into the creature's eyes and tells it that, since its cruel old master is gone, it is totally free to return to the outside world if it wishes. The young man then calmly asks what they would truly like to do from then on. The monster remembers with bitterness the threats from the gang's former leader, who treated them as silent combat tools. They stare at Hitoya attentively, noticing the stark difference in the way the young man treats them. They find this young man very strange for giving them a choice, since with his power, he could simply force them to obey. Even confused by such kindness, the two heads come to the conclusion that they feel no anger toward the new protector. Next, the beasts take a step forward in a docile manner, surprising the young man with their friendly approach. With a relieved smile, Hitoya asks if they really decided to stay there to live and protect that dungeon alongside him and his little wolves. The dragon's two heads close their eyes softly, sealing a decision of mutual trust with the young man. Extremely happy with the response, Hitoya flashes a genuine smile and thanks his new companions for their loyalty. He immediately activates his special technique and confirms the command to add the new monster to the system. A magical golden light envelops the two-headed dragon as the system notifies that it has been successfully integrated into the dungeon. At that exact moment, the invader counter in the dungeon drops to 0, triggering a regenerative glow over the monsters. Hitoya witnesses the dragon's wounds vanish completely and realizes that the dungeon rules guarantee the total healing of the creatures when no enemies are around. Suddenly, a loud rustling of leaves catches the young man's attention and puts him on alert. Quick, light little footsteps begin to approach hurriedly through the low vegetation. To Hitoya's relief, dozens of helpless little wolves come running and barking with joy in his direction. He opens his arms relieved and affectionately asks if all the little pups are doing okay after the scare. The small puppies jump happily around the young man's legs, celebrating the victory. One of the most attached little wolves approaches in an affectionate way to get its head petted. Hitoya looks with admiration at the pack's little leader and recognizes that he only managed to defend everyone thanks to its bravery. The young man extends his hand gently to stroke the furry pup, which closes its eyes, enjoying the peaceful moment. He smiles warmly and thanks them from the bottom of his heart for the loyal support he received from his little companions. The little wolf returns the affectionate gesture with a bright and cute look, overflowing with happiness. Now surrounded by the entire noisy pack and the gigantic winged dragon, Hitoya walks happily through the dungeon forest. The young man sits on the grass and enjoys a brief and well-deserved moment of tranquility alongside his little creatures. Watching the pups' joyful dance, he remembers with pain his past life in which he was weak and could not protect anyone, feeling grateful that everyone is doing well today. With tears of relief in his eyes, he celebrates the fact that he was finally strong enough to keep all his friends safe. The young man feels that for the first time since reincarnating into that cruel world, he managed to take a true step forward. But his thoughts are suddenly interrupted when one of the pups begins to climb up his head without any ceremony. While observing the scene, the two-headed dragon surprises the young man by mentally asking if he is truly a human. Hitoya widens his eyes and shouts in absolute shock upon realizing that the colossal creature can communicate through speech. Sometime later, the young man takes up his post on the branch of a tall tree, guarding the dungeon entrance. From up high, he reflects on the information revealed by the dragon regarding the dangerous type of people who usually invade the place. He recalls the warning that the so-called challengers of that region are actually the cruel hunters of the Ryoseizoku gang. The dragon had explained that this guild of thugs captures dungeon monsters to enslave them as weapons or sell them as mere farming materials. Thoughtful, Hitoya pets the little wolf on his shoulder and gets worried knowing that the dragon hunters will surely return to try and reclaim it. The beasts' heads had confirmed that the supreme leader of the band, known as Boss Fucho, rules everyone with an iron fist and fear, and will soon come personally. The enemy leader's terrifying aura is described as something on a completely different level, leaving Hitoya tense about the imminence of a clash. However, the young man decides not to ask any more questions about the matter, so as not to force his new allies to relive such traumatic memories. The grand beasts' heads close their eyes silently, showing gratitude for the young man's consideration. He climbs down from the branch, thanks them gently for the valuable information, and decides to focus on preparing the defenses. Hitoya raises his index finger with confidence and lets everyone know he has a strategic proposal for what they should do next. He suggests that the entire group remain sheltered in the safe depths of the dungeon, while he takes on the responsibility of guarding the entrance. With a simple plan in mind, he explains that, since the dungeon has only one entry gate, keeping watch from the trees will grant them time to react to any invasion. The dragon's two heads observe the young man in silence, impressed by his determination to protect them. A wolf pup lets out a low, affectionate whimper, showing that it will miss its savior if it stays far away. Hitoya pets the tiny creature and gently tells it not to worry, because everything will turn out fine. Despite trying to maintain a confident posture to calm the pack, deep down the young man admits he feels massive anxiety over what lies ahead. He focuses his gaze on his system screen and remembers the incredible power to copy the techniques of enemies who fall before his defenses. The young man smirks upon realizing that the more challengers he defeats in the dungeon, the stronger he can become. He plans to accumulate skills by defeating the hunters, and vows to wipe out the entire Ryuseizoku gang to guarantee the ultimate peace of his new home. Knowing that total peace might take a while to arrive, he nestles among the leaves and commits to fighting with all the strength he has acquired. But suddenly, an unexpected sound cue echoes through the area, startling the young man and all the creatures at the same time. The red system screen flashes in front of Hitoya, urgently alerting that new challengers have just entered the dungeon. The massive stone main gate begins to open slowly with a menacing rumble. Through the shadows of the entrance, a group of heavily armed thugs with the gang symbol on their chests begins to advance. The leader of the band lets out a cruel laugh and comments to his accomplices that the traitor, who stole the two-headed dragon, will soon be hunted down and executed by the boss. From up on the branch, Hitoya observes apprehensively the large number of gang thugs who have just invaded his territory. The young man begins to break into a cold sweat upon realizing he has never faced so many opponents at the same time in a real fight. As they advance, the invaders laugh and propose a cruel wager to see who can eliminate the highest number of dungeon monsters. Hearing that the creatures' lives are treated like a sick game, the young man is overcome by an overwhelming rage and grinds his teeth. Hitoya vows to himself that he will not let these cruel humans keep treating monsters as mere hunting playthings. Even outnumbered, he trusts his new powers and activates Stealth Shot, known as Phantom Strike, to initiate the counterattack. Aware that he is facing an entire army alone, he needs to act with extreme intelligence and precision. The young man's plan is to weaken the enemy group's offensive power first, activating his invisible attack technique once more. Silently and precisely from up in the trees, he sends out hidden blasts of energy directed straight at the thugs' weapons. In the blink of an eye, the invaders' swords and daggers begin to mysteriously shatter in their hands. The group throws themselves into absolute panic and begins to question if that was some kind of invisible magic attack. However, a more arrogant hunter scoffs at his allies' panic and tells them not to worry, since this is just an F-rank dungeon. Hitoya notices their reaction and begins to deduce a crucial rule about how human-class powers operate. He realizes with great surprise that, unlike monsters, the skills of human hunters seem to depend entirely on the weapons they carry. Faced with this valuable discovery regarding the enemy's weaknesses, a brilliant plan begins to form in the young man's mind. But before he could act, another irritated hunter decides to activate his slicing ability using a large combat scythe. However, the prota's invisible attack hits the scythe squarely mid-swing, breaking it into pieces and leaving the attacker in shock. Hitoya confirms his theory that breaking enemy equipment is enough to completely neutralize any invader's power. Wasting no time, he focuses his hidden attacks and begins to systematically destroy every spear and dagger in the band. Totally defenseless and unable to see the origin of the shots, the thugs scream in terror as they watch their entire arsenal turn to dust. However, a hunter wearing special goggles activates a vision enhancement power and manages to spot Hitoya's position in the tree. The young man realizes that the hunter's techniques do not just serve to attack, but also to track hidden targets. Capitalizing on the revelation, one of the swordsmen charges fiercely, unleashing a sharp slicing wind strike toward the branch where the young man is. With impressive agility and reflexes, Hitoya leaps into the air just in time to escape the devastating wind blade. He lands softly on the ground and focuses all his attention on dodging any direct attack with precision. Next, the young man charges forward at high speed like a blue flash right into the invaders' front lines. Seeing his men fall one by one, the group's leader enrages and orders everyone to attack together in a final encirclement. Dodging the blows masterfully, the young man continues his relentless onslaught, focused on breaking all physical resistance. He twists his body with unparalleled agility to destroy every remaining weapon the opponents try to raise against him. The hunters fall back in absolute panic upon seeing their last options for defense completely pulverized by the prota's strength. Disarmed and without understanding how a weak dungeon monster can have so much power, they tremble with fear before him. Reality sets in for the thugs, and they finally comprehend that this mysterious being is not just some ordinary low-level monster. One of his adversaries gulps and, gripped by despair, gives up on the fight, announcing he is getting the heck out of there. Within a few seconds, a bandwagon effect triggers, and the whole band begins to run in a panic back toward the exit gate. They flee desperately through the dungeon's dark passageway, completely abandoning the hunting mission. At that same time, a series of system notifications begins to flash on the screen, logging the flight and withdrawal of every single invader. Hitoya observes the empty corridor and is surprised to see that the enemies simply gave up on the invasion and fled out of fear. Suddenly, a new glowing panel pops up in front of him, notifying that his special boss technique has been activated automatically. The young man lets out an exclamation of surprise as he sees the new alerts glowing intensely right before his eyes. He is left open-mouthed upon seeing that the system just registered the acquisition of the Windblade, Twisted Step, and Enhanced Vision techniques from the enemies who fled. Hitoya can barely believe he actually absorbed the abilities of all those hunters who just retreated. After thinking it over for a bit, a massive smile breaks out on the young man's face as he finally understands the rules of his rebirth technique. He realizes that, as far as the dungeon system is concerned, fleeing and abandoning the invasion is exactly equivalent to failing to clear the challenge. This means that any hunter who runs away from the place in fear will have all their powers permanently stolen by him. Meanwhile, back in the clearing, the last remaining hunter looks back terrified upon realizing he has been completely abandoned by his cronies. Desperate and with a maniacal grin, he tries to maintain his stance and screams to himself that this F-rank dungeon was supposed to be a breeze to clear. The young man just watches him in silence from behind the trees, patiently waiting for the cornered enemy's next move. Driven to madness, the hunter activates his special technique with the intention of torching the entire deep forest to force the monsters out. He fires a massive and destructive magical fireball directly at the shelter where the pups are hiding. In the deep forest, the little wolves throw themselves into absolute panic as they watch the immense wave of blazing heat advance in their direction. Hitoya grinds his teeth furiously and vows that he will not let that cruel attack reach his little companions under any circumstances. The young man instantly uses Windblade, the ability he just copied from the fleeing warriors, unleashing a sharp emerald slice. The powerful gust of wind cuts the immense fireball right in half before advancing relentlessly toward the startled shooter. The projectile is hit with such violence that the thug's bow shatters, and he suffers a deep wound to his arm. The man collapses to the ground, screaming in pain, while the companions watching from afar are shocked by what just happened. The band's leader begins to tremble upon realizing the enemy used the exact Windblade technique of his own warriors. Enveloped by an imposing blue aura, Hitoya walks slowly toward the surviving invaders. With a cold and determined look, the Prota firmly warns them that this dungeon is no longer a playground for them. The band's leader falls into total panic, letting out a cry of terror as he faces that crushing presence. Without a second thought, he turns around and flees desperately through the forest, abandoning the battle once and for all. Hitoya watches in silence as the entire band runs back toward the safety of the exit gate, leaving behind nothing but shattered weapons. The dungeon's monumental gate closes once again in absolute silence, bringing back the tranquility of the forest. The young man takes a deep breath, finally feeling the tension of combat dissipate from his body. He looks at his own hands, still surprised by the impressive turn that fight took. The young man recalls when he reincarnated as a weak skeleton and could not defend himself against a single hunter. He smiles upon realizing that today, even facing an entire band of armed invaders, he was able to protect all his friends and emerge victorious. Satisfied with his progress, Hitoya clenches his fist with determination, feeling that he is on the right path. With the challenger counter at 0, the entire pack of pups and the dragon's 2 heads happily return to their guardian's side. Meanwhile, at the guild's luxurious hideout in the eastern capital, a nobleman remarks ironically on the hunter's failure in a mere F-rank dungeon. Alvara, the feared leader of the Ryusei Zoku, replies with irritation that he does not usually keep useless warriors under his command. With a cruel smile, he states without any mercy that weak, useless henchmen serve only as food for his beasts. The influential lord of the eastern capital, Pedro Detless, laughs at the situation and comments on how much he would have liked to watch the failures get devoured by the great dragon. But the malicious conversation is interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps from one of the survivors who has just returned from the cemetery. The surviving hunter appears shaking with terror and begs for the leader's attention, shouting that it is impossible to clear that dungeon. Alvara raises an eyebrow and lets out a grunt of distrust, finding it absurd to hear such an excuse. The man desperately insists that no ordinary hunter will manage to survive in that place from now on. He explains terrified that the dungeon boss did not just copy their techniques, but also used them simultaneously in a perfect manner. He warns with conviction that the mysterious creature is in extreme danger, and that it is no simple ordinary monster. Alvara listens to everything with contempt and asks if those losers really crawled back just to make excuses for failing the invasion. He glares at the subordinate with a murderous look and calls him completely useless trash. Suddenly, the gigantic silhouette of a terrifying beast emerges from the shadows behind the thug leader, making the survivors shake with fear. With absolute coldness, Alvara calls over the great dragon and lets it know that today's food has just been served. The failed henchmen let out groans of despair as they realize the cruel fate that awaits them right then and there. While the cries of agony echo through the room in a chilling way, Lord Pedro Detless just sips his wine, amusing himself with the bloody show. After taking another sip, the nobleman remarks thoughtfully that this whole story about the strong new monster is quite unusual. He points out that by the known rules, a dungeon boss should not even exist in an F-classified location. The Lord questions whether the leader actually believes the rumors, and Alvara admits that this whole situation does indeed smell highly fishy. The thug boss notes that the shooter Gul'dan and the two-headed dragon have not yet returned from that dungeon, increasing his suspicions. A greedy and intrigued smile appears on the lips of one of them in the face of the mystery. They know perfectly well that the appearance of a rare, unknown monster means the chance to obtain valuable materials worth a true fortune. Faced with the possibility of turning a massive profit from this mysterious boss, the Lord suggests that Alvara himself head down there to handle the situation personally. The Ryo Suzoku leader displays a sadistic grin and replies that he quite likes the idea of going on the hunt. Seeing his business partner's enthusiasm, the Lord greedily demands that his share of future profits be doubled. While the shadows of human greed shift in the capital, the day breaks sunny and peaceful over the F-rank dungeon. Sitting comfortably on a tree branch, Hitoya observes one of the pups running happily through the clearing below. The small pup barks excitedly and wags its tail, trying to catch its new protector's attention. Curious about the little creature's sudden excitement, the young man leans over to look and asks what happened. He climbs down from the tree smoothly and lands on the grass right beside the small furry puppy. Next, the little wolf turns around and begins to run hurriedly toward the deep forest. Hitoya follows it closely with his gaze, wondering if something important or mysterious happened in the deep end of his territory. Hitoya walks slowly through the depths of the lush green forest, closely accompanied by the little wolf pup, who hops along happily by his side. The young man realizes they have already walked quite far into the forest, as he watches the pup eagerly leap into a crevice between the trees. Upon entering the area, he is surprised to come face to face with a massive cluster of glowing mushrooms that light up the entire cave in a vibrant green hue. He recognizes the place instantly, and remembers that this was exactly where he found those special mushrooms in the past. The little wolf pup lets out a cheerful bark to get his attention, causing Hitoya to look over, curious about the little creature's behavior. Suddenly, the young man's eyes widen as he notices something extraordinary materializing right before him. A towering, majestic golden door appears in the middle of the cave, glowing with an intense magical light. Hitoya takes a startled step back, unable to hide his surprise at the sight of that immense structure floating in midair. Shocked and unable to comprehend what is happening, he wonders to himself what that mysterious golden door could possibly be. The young man asks the pup if that thing really wasn't there before, while the little wolf pup continues to bark enthusiastically. With his heart racing from anxiety, the Prota slowly extends his glowing hand toward the immense structure. As soon as his fingers touch the cold, gleaming surface of the door, a powerful energy begins to manifest. An explosion of blindingly bright golden light consumes the entire room, causing the young man to let out a startled cry. In the middle of that blinding glare, a system panel projects into the air to notify him that the dungeon boss's identity has been successfully verified. Hitoya is completely tight-lipped as he reads a new message announcing the activation of the dungeon rank evolution system. A powerful shockwave reverberates through the entire cave, scattering sparks of pure energy in all directions. Gradually, the intense light begins to fade, leaving only the majestic golden door floating silently over the glowing mushrooms. Holding the startled wolf pup in his arms, Hitoya notices that the trembling has finally stopped and tries to process what he just witnessed. However, the door suddenly emits a red glow, and a warning on the screen indicates that the requirements for the dungeon rank evolution have not yet been met. Intrigued, the young man realizes there are specific conditions he must fulfill to successfully raise the level of his territory. The system displays new screens explaining that the door leads to an unexplored sector, and that it will remain locked until the rank is elevated. The message on the screen makes it clear that the only way to unlock that secret passage is by achieving the dungeon rank evolution. Hitoya reflects in silence and concludes that he will have to figure out how to strengthen his territory if he wants to discover what lies behind that portal. Just then, the sound of flapping wings catches his attention, and the two-headed dragon lands gracefully from the treetops. Hitoya gives a friendly greeting to his powerful winged ally, while the little wolf pup also looks happily at the companion who just arrived. Curious about the rules of that world, the Prota asks his new allies if it is actually possible for dungeons to go up in rank. He comments worriedly that a dungeon changing ranks seems like something completely unheard of. One of the dragon's heads promptly responds that it has never heard of anything like that happening before. Given the negative response, Hitoya asks what would happen if they managed to pull off such a feat, but the creature admits it has absolutely no idea either. Looking together at the immense glowing portal, they all begin to suspect that this graveyard does indeed hold unique secrets. The young man ponders the term unexplored sector displayed by the system, and realizes his dungeon is far more mysterious than it appeared to be. It is a mystical, untouched location where absolutely no adventurer or hunter has ever managed to set foot in history. A massive wave of curiosity takes over the young man, who finds himself imagining what kind of extraordinary treasures or dangers could be hidden on the other side of the door. Hitoya smiles warmly and thanks the little wolf pup for sniffing out and finding that secret crevice in the forest. Meanwhile, in the deepest abyss of the forest graveyard, the system continues to register the existence of that locked secret area. Far beneath the earth, an ancient relic known as the Sacred Ark begins to react, initiating the process of releasing its sealed locks. Back on the surface, Hitoya relaxes on a tree branch alongside his companions and decides to ask them what their names are. He asks jokingly if they could finally reveal their names today, since they are now great battle partners. However, the two heads of the dragon merely stare at him in absolute silence, maintaining a look of extreme distrust. Awkwarded by the cold reaction, the young man gestures quickly, saying it is no problem if they do not want to tell him, mentally lamenting that a barrier still exists between them. Suddenly, a shiver runs down Hitoya's spine as he senses a powerful hostile vibration approaching his territory. The two-headed dragon also goes on high alert upon hearing the thunderous sound of the dungeon's main gate being forced open. Hitoya turns quickly toward the entrance as he realizes that a powerful new trespasser has just breached the area. The system flashes an urgent red intruder alert as a massive creature with sharp teeth steps through the stone passage. A gigantic sharp black claw slams with extreme violence onto the forest floor, ripping cracks into the earth. Riding atop his fearsome winged beast, Alvara, the ruthless leader of the criminals, arrogantly declares that he will completely destroy and tear apart that low-level dungeon. With a sadistic smile and flaunting his title as a level 66 great swordsman, the villain warns that he intends to loot and sell every single item of value he finds inside. From a distance, the two-headed dragon recognizes the terrifying presence and alerts Hitoya that the supreme leader of the Dragon Raiders himself has come for battle. The Proto stares at the immense silhouette of the swordsman and gulps, realizing that this enemy possesses a strength infinitely superior to any hunter he has faced to this day. Despite his fear, Hitoya remembers the suffering of his past allies and fills himself with determination, knowing he must stop that monster once and for all to protect his home. Hitoya's right arm begins to rapidly transform into a sharp, glowing blue energy blade. He clenches his fist with extreme force, concentrating all of his magical power to deliver a devastating strike. With determination in his eyes, the Proto vows to put an end to this and decides to use all his accumulated techniques to face the villain head-on. The young man charges swiftly toward his opponent, unleashing his energy strike with the intention of defeating him in a single movement. He instantly activates the Phantom Strike skill, firing an invisible, ultra-fast projectile at the enemy leader. However, Alvara reacts with impressive speed and blocks the tricky attack using nothing but his giant blade. Hitoya is completely shocked to see that his opponent was able to intercept a stealth technique so effortlessly. The fearsome warrior displays a mocking smirk, showing that he is not the least bit impressed by the young man's power. He taunts the Proto from atop his mount, asking disdainfully why he is trying to act all sneaky. Hidden among the trees alongside the two-headed dragon, the young man realizes with concern that his exact location has already been fully compromised. Alvara points his giant sword in his direction, and comments in a tone of superiority that he has finally found the famous dungeon boss. The entire band of raiders surrounds the area from below, while Hitoya tries to maintain his defensive position up on the tree branch. Suddenly, the criminal leader shifts his focus away from the Proto as he spots the two-headed winged creature right beside him. The monster trembles in terror as Alvara notices with irritation that the control collars enslaving them have been removed. Enveloped in a sinister purple aura, the villain states that he does not care what happened to cause them to break free. With a deeply murderous gaze, he coldly declares that tools incapable of following orders are completely useless. The two heads of the dragon fall into utter despair and begin to sweat from terror as they feel the terrible pressure of their former master. Hitoya immediately leaps in front of his allies and yells furiously that they are not anyone's tools. The warrior lets out a sadistic smile at the sight, finding it hilarious that a mere dungeon ingredient is trying to protect his hunting tools. While the villain finds the entire situation amusing, the Proto maintains a serious and focused expression, preparing his counter. Alvara then raises his weapon and gives the attack order to his henchmen, commanding the entire group to charge and slaughter the forest defenders. Seeing the imminent threat, the two heads of the dragon exchange a quick look and resolve to fight with all their might. One of the heads opens its jaws wide, gathering a massive amount of glowing ice energy deep within its throat. The freezing hailstone storm skill is instantly activated, unleashing a blast of extreme cold against the invaders. At the same time, the other head awakens the warped flames technique, generating a scorching and destructive heat wave. The combined attack of fire and ice hits the front line of the criminal band dead on, and they let out cries of pain and despair as they are repelled by the elemental explosion. Hitoya watches the devastation with admiration as he realizes the true offensive power of his massive allies' combined techniques. The young man notices that the opponents are retreating, disoriented by the impact, and realizes that the band's defenses have been temporarily shattered. Mentally thanking them for the help, Hitoya seizes the perfect opening and activates Windblade with the intention of wiping out all the remaining enemies in one fell swoop. He decides to combine the cutting power of the wind with his accelerated movement technique to deliver an even faster and more lethal attack. The young man channels a new special skill that allows him to curve the trajectory of the wind strike mid-flight, making it completely unpredictable. The emerald slashes serpent through the air and slice through the mercenaries' shields and armor, as they yell in disbelief upon being struck by projectiles that change direction. Furious at the successful counterattack, Alvara decides that his absolute top priority will be to assassinate the traitorous dragons first. He channels his control magic and orders his monstrous flying beast to advance ruthlessly to devour the rebels. The gigantic black dragon obeys the command and dives at high speed directly toward one of Hitoya's winged allies. Suddenly, a glowing subjugation collar appears out of nowhere and snaps tightly around the neck of the defenseless creature. Under the terrible influence of the magical control artifact, the dragon begins to choke and completely loses the strength to fight back. Alvara displays a cruel look and explains that the subjugation ring guarantees absolute control, because monsters have no right to choose and must only serve humans. The swordsman shows off the glittering ring on his finger and sadistically warns what the punishment will be if they try to defy him again. With extreme coldness, the villain threatens to activate the collar to force one of the dragon's heads to assassinate its own other half. Overcome by absolute panic at such cruelty, the two-headed dragon begins to tremble and weep from fear. While the beast is paralyzed by terror, Alvara's immense mount charges forward with its massive jaws wide open to deliver the finishing blow. Unable to move due to the control seal, the poor dragon can only watch as the colossal jaws approach its head. The terrible monster bares its sharp teeth, ready to swallow Hitoya's ally once and for all. With absolutely no way out, the creature closes its eyes, accepting its tragic fate. At the absolute last split second, Hitoya flashes forward like lightning and throws himself in front, shielding the wounded companion's body to protect it with his own back. Upon opening its eyes and realizing it is still alive, the dragon is completely stunned to find itself safe in the proto's arms. The young man uses his incredible speed to propel both of them high into the air, narrowly escaping the massive beast's devastating attack. Alvara grinds his teeth in frustration and yells with all his might for his henchmen to pursue the dungeon boss without rest. While gliding safely through the air, Hitoya holds his frightened friend firmly and can feel just how much the creature's body is still shaking from the terrible trauma of the past. Hitoya deeply regrets seeing his friend consumed by so much dread and apologizes to the two-headed dragon for not realizing the sheer scale of its trauma. The young man lands gently on a tree branch and tells the dragon firmly to run and hide in the depths of the forest. Surprised by the order to retreat, the dragon asks if the Prota truly intends to face the entire band and their terrifying leader all by himself. Meanwhile, down below, the mercenaries spot the young man and yell for the archers to fire everything they have to knock him out of the tree. With complete serenity, the young man turns his back and reassures his friends that he will be perfectly fine during the fight. Displaying a confident smile, he promises that he will fight right there until the dragon is truly free from its chains. The two-headed dragon stares at him, deeply moved, feeling for the very first time that it has found someone it can trust with its life. Without wasting another moment, the Prota leaps toward the ground to begin the confrontation with the invaders. The enemy warriors charge forward with weapons drawn, yelling furiously for everyone to focus on taking down the dungeon boss. With his eyes glowing an intense sky blue hue, Hitoya vows that he won't let anyone else get hurt and decides to finish this battle alone. He immediately activates his enhanced perception skills to track the battlefield, mapping out the presence of the 10 remaining henchmen. The Prota moves like a ghost among the warriors, unleashing multiple wind slashes that pulverize the enemy's defenses instantly. In an overwhelming sequence of acrobatic strikes and cutting blasts, he defeats one opponent after another without suffering a single scratch. One of his fallen adversaries on the ground watches the young man and mutters with difficulty that this monster possesses absurd strength. Hitoya stands up calmly from the midst of the battle debris and focuses his attention on the final obstacle remaining. He glares intently in the swordsman's direction, well aware that Alvara is the only opponent left standing in the clearing. The mercenary leader looks at his fallen subordinates with utter contempt and grumbles angrily about how useless they all are. Without hesitation, Alvara activates the special Devourment Empowerment technique and orders his massive flying beast to prepare for the attack. The colossal black dragon lets out a thunderous roar as a powerful reddish energy begins to emanate from the collar around its neck. Hitoya notices the drastic shift in the mana flow and realizes that his opponent has indeed activated the devastating power of that beast. To everyone's surprise, the massive dragon advances ruthlessly and begins to crush and pin down its own fallen ally warriors on the ground. The Prota's eyes widen in pure horror as he witnesses the beginning of a terrible and bloody carnage. The dreadful creature snaps up and devours its own guild members, while the desperate screams of the victims echo throughout the entire forest. Hitoya covers his mouth in utter disgust and absolute shock, unable to believe that the enemy leader would sacrifice his own men just to gain power. The dragon swallows the mercenaries whole, letting blood splatter across the ground as its dark aura grows exponentially. The massive beast's body begins to contort and undergo a bizarre mutation due to the terrible feast of human flesh. Backing away to maintain a safe distance, the young man watches as the creature becomes considerably more resilient and intimidating. Its claws grow much larger and sharper, while the monster's musculature expands in a terrifying manner. With the devourment bonus fully activated, the gigantic creature now looms before Hitoya at twice its original size. The colossal monster roars deafeningly, generating a gust of wind that makes the surrounding trees sway violently. It begins to gather a massive sphere of destructive energy in its mouth, preparing to unleash a breath capable of reducing everything to ashes. Sensing the immense wave of heat building up, the Prota realizes in desperation that this attack could destroy the entire forest and leave his dungeon in ruins. The young man charges with all his might directly at the colossal creature in an attempt to prevent the devastating breath from being unleashed. However, he wonders to himself how he can possibly stop a dragon this gigantic before it is too late. Suddenly, the young man locks his eyes onto the glowing collar surrounding the massive beast's neck and has a major revelation. He remembers that he managed to free the two-headed dragon by destroying its subjugation ring and considers that the same method might work this time. The young man activates his wind blade and focuses all his strength on the single goal of shattering the opponent's control collar. He fires the sharp projectile, slicing through the air directly toward the colossal dragon's neck. However, Alvara notices the trajectory of the attack and moves quickly to intervene before the blade can hit the target. With a precise movement of his giant sword, the enemy leader defends the monster's collar and successfully parries the strike. Hitoya takes a shocked step back upon seeing that the villain was able to predict his strategy so nimbly. Alvara lets out a sarcastic laugh and warns the young man that he will never let a mere rank F dungeon boss ruin his plans. The swordsman activates his own defensive magical technique and makes it clear that he will not allow anyone to touch his dragon's control collar. Hitoya grinds his teeth as he feels the immense magical pressure radiating from Alvara's weapon, making his movements difficult. At that exact moment, the colossal dragon points its jaws, illuminated by destructive energy, directly at the cornered young man. The Prota knows perfectly well that if he cannot stop that colossal beast right now, his entire home and his friends will be completely wiped out. Given the leader's strong defensive reaction, Hitoya concludes with certainty that the collar is indeed the weak point and the core of the enemy's entire control. The braided warrior stares down at him with utter arrogance, certain that his overwhelming victory is already guaranteed. Ignoring the danger, the young man leaps into the air with renewed determination and activates the curved blade technique to bypass the swordsman's defense. But Alvara reacts immediately and warns that he won't let his opponent even brush against the control collar. Activating his deadly counterattack technique, Alvara delivers a crushing blow to the ground and activates his cleaving earthquake technique to completely destabilize the Prota. An immense shockwave explodes the ground, creating a deep crater and violently throwing the young man away. The swordsman lets out mocking laughter from atop the flying beast, while Hitoya tries to recover quickly from the devastating onslaught. Looking up, the young man panics as he realizes the dragon is already poised to unleash its destructive breath directly at him. The colossal creature roars, gathering an immense sphere of heat that emits an intense and threatening reddish light. Aware that he has no more time to hesitate, the Prota sprints swiftly across a massive tree root to try and get closer to his target. He concentrates to the absolute maximum on the idea of destroying the enemy collar, planning to combine the Phantom Strike with another one of his powerful abilities. With the massive fireball coming his way, Hitoya vows that he will protect this dungeon and all his friends at any cost. He fires a sharp, precise energy slash that tears through the air and advances relentlessly toward the colossal dragon's throat. Alvara's eyes widen, and he lets out an exclamation of surprise as he is caught completely off guard by the surreal speed of the onslaught. Hitoya also lets out a startled cry as he notices an unexpected interference happening right before his eyes. The two-headed dragon appears out of nowhere from the clouds, charging with sharp claws directly at the irritated swordsman. His winged allies tell Hitoya to focus solely on breaking the collar, while they take care of distracting the mount and their terrible leader. The two heads of the dragon attack in coordination from above and below, creating the perfect shield and distraction that the Prota needed. Alvara goes completely out of his mind with rage and bellows that mere useless monsters should never dare to oppose him. With a manic gaze, the enemy leader brands his giant weapon with hatred, questioning if the creatures actually think they have any chance of winning. He delivers an extremely violent slash against the allied dragons, trying to force them to retreat once and for all. Making use of every single second of that precious opportunity, Hitoya displays a cold expression and locks in his final decision. He vows to put an end to this dungeon nightmare definitively, and fires his cutting technique with surgical precision. In an ultra-fast, acrobatic spin, the young man strikes the subjugation collar controlling the massive black dragon directly. The two-headed dragon watches in awe as the opponent's red control collar shatters entirely in midair. With the collar destroyed, Alvara is thrown far away from his mount, while the massive creature finds itself free from the terrible oppression. The immense dragon roars freely, feeling the control magic dissipate from its mind for good. Destabilized and without the support of his flying beast, Alvara falls uncontrollably toward the clearing's ground. At the same time, the luxurious subjugation ring on his finger breaks into 1,000 pieces, shattering the control link forever. Fallen on the grass, the villain's eyes widen in absolute disbelief as he wonders how a mere monster was capable of breaking that legendary seal. The system emphasizes that the subjugation ring is a device of absolute command for humans over beasts, and that its destruction by a monster should be totally impossible. However, the young dungeon boss advanced with total focus and shattered the magical artifact with ease, repeating the historic feat he had already performed in the past. The swordsman begins to tremble before that presence, asking himself in terror what the true identity of that mysterious being could be. Despite being severely wounded, Alvara slowly stands up with his giant sword in hand, enveloped in a sinister purple glow. Overcome by the madness of defeat, he screams that he will leave absolutely nothing behind and vows to reduce the Prota and the entire dungeon to dust. He raises the immense iron blade and attacks with uncontrolled violence, willing to tear apart everything around him in a final act of desperation. But mid-impact, the blade of his giant sword cracks completely and shatters into several useless pieces. Taking advantage of the failure of his opponent's weapon, Hitoya descends from the heavens like a bluish lightning bolt to deliver the definitive strike. He fondly remembers all the adorable wolf pups and forest allies he swore to protect from any kind of human threat. With his eyes glowing with absolute determination, the young man coldly warns that this entire nightmare ends right here. The Prota delivers a titanic emerald slash that hits Alvara dead on, defeating the criminal leader once and for all. A colossal explosion of bluish light purifies the entire clearing, dissipating the evil energy accumulated during the battle. Tranquility finally returns to the deep forest, as the tiny wolf pups begin to play happily under the sun's rays. Breathing heavily from the exhaustion of combat, Hitoya approaches the two-headed dragon to check if they are hurt. Utterly defeated and crawling on the ground back toward the exit portal, a weakened Alvara curses and calls everyone worthless trash. He grinds his teeth in pure humiliation, desperately begging that a mere dungeon boss not look down on him that way. However, the immense silhouette of the black dragon he used to enslave looms majestically right behind the fallen villain. The great beast stares at him with deep hatred, remembering the long period during which it had its life and energy cruelly drained by him. The creature admits that, under the effect of the magical collar, it never had the strength to resist, and remained chained to the evil whims of its master. But now free from its chains, the dragon roars and opens its giant jaws, intending to take responsibility and finish off its former oppressor. Overcome by an indescribable panic, Alvara lets out desperate screams and curses his terrible fate as the shadow engulfs him. In his final moments, the warrior bellows with hatred before being completely devoured by his own beast. Hitoya and the allied dragons watch the scene in silence, while the system panel flashes on the screen, indicating that the number of intruders in the dungeon has finally reached 0. With the intruder count concluded, peace returns for good, and the violent battle against the dragon raiders finally comes to an end. Right after the battle, a system panel pops up offering the option to recruit the impressive level 71 Black Dragon as an official allied monster of the dungeon. Hitoya looks thoughtfully at the gigantic dragon, weighing the possibilities of expanding his army of defenders. The young man explains to the creature that he can register it as an official inhabitant of the dungeon if it wishes, and asks directly what it prefers to do from now on. The great dragon remains silent for a brief moment, before responding that, in truth, it wishes to leave and move on from this place. Showing complete understanding, Hitoya smiles gently and accepts the creature's decision without creating any obstacles. His two-headed companions are surprised by the young man's attitude and ask if he is absolutely sure about this, since that was a rare opportunity to gain an extremely powerful ally. Hitoya responds calmly that the beast has already suffered far too much under the cruel control of humans, and that he refuses to chain it up again, as he does not want to become a tyrant like the dragon raiders. He adds cheerfully that he is certain the Grand Dragon has its own dreams and goals to pursue throughout the wide world. Deeply grateful for the freedom granted, the Black Dragon reveals that its new mission in life will be to set all of its kind free. It explains that it intends to save the other monsters of its species that still remain imprisoned and enslaved by the Dragon Raiders Guild. The creature remembers with bitterness the long period during which it lived as a mere puppet, chained to the selfish desires of humans. It regrets having spent so much time serving only to take innocent lives, when in reality it should have been living free as a proud dragon. The gigantic creature flaps its immense black wings, preparing to take flight toward its new journey. It declares that this journey of liberation will be its way of redeeming itself for past mistakes, bidding a respectful farewell to the young master and his winged companions. Following that, the imposing beast takes to the skies in a majestic fashion, quickly disappearing into the sunny horizon. Its voice echoes from a distance, expressing eternal gratitude to Hitoya for having broken the subjugation spell. The two-headed dragon watches the empty sky and comments in surprise that its former companion in captivity has finally managed to move on. Hitoya displays a genuinely happy smile, feeling that he made the right call by granting freedom to the powerful dragon. The Prota then turns to his two-headed companions and asks gently if they also wish to leave to live outside the dungeon. While a magical recovery light envelops the entire territory, the dragons admit that although this dungeon is a bit strange, they prefer to stay. They shyly confess that they have come to really like the place, and remind him that the young man had asked for their names earlier. With friendly smiles, the two heads finally introduce themselves officially, revealing that their names are Atta and Yata. Beaming with joy, Hitoya hugs the two of them warmly and thanks them immensely for the trust shown in revealing their names. Shortly after, the dungeon evolution system begins to initialize automatically, counting the defeated and runaway invaders. A massive pillar of golden light descends from the heavens upon the Rank F dungeon, initiating the transformation process of the entire territory. The system notification flashes in a golden color to announce that the requirements necessary for the dungeon rank evolution have been fully met. Hitoya lets out an exclamation of surprise upon seeing the immense amount of magical energy that begins to emanate from the walls and floor of the cave. The entire deep forest is bathed in a radiant glow as the forest graveyard officially advances to the next level of power. In the middle of so many luminous notifications, a rather mysterious and surprising message pops up, reporting the passing of Archimonde. The flare expands in a monumental fashion, shaking the stone structures and spreading purifying magic to every corner of the sanctuary. The system finally concludes the process and confirms that the territory has now been promoted to rank E. Hitoya and his allied dragons look around slack-jawed as they witness the drastic changes that begin to take place in the environment. The entire geography of the dungeon begins to reorganize itself before their eyes, opening new passages and expanding the boundaries of his territory. He observes various debris and rocks collapsing from the outer walls, wondering if the dungeon's borders have just suffered a complete collapse. Curious about the new possibilities, the Prota tries to understand what the evolution of the territory will truly mean for its inhabitants from now on. Suddenly, the little wolf pup appears, falling clumsily from the top of a cliff, letting out frightened whines for help. Hitoya catches him carefully and celebrates with relief upon seeing that the pup is safe, but soon notices that the little wolf is extremely agitated and trying to catch his attention. The little dog hops around and begins to whine and point insistently toward the dense forest. Hitoya scratches his head awkwardly and admits that he still cannot comprehend his little friend's canine language, even though he knows the pup is trying his best to warn him about something crucial. The little wolf then turns around and begins to sprint toward the deep cave of glowing mushrooms. The young man decides to follow him, well aware that the little creature's unusual behavior will surely guide him to some major discovery in his territory. He calls upon Ada and Yada to accompany him and advances with firm steps toward the heart of the secret forest. Upon crossing the stone crevice and entering the cave, the group comes across a bizarre scene that leaves them completely in shock. Hitoya's eyes widen as he notices that the immense glowing mushrooms are actually shaking and moving independently. Several smaller mushrooms begin to take tiny hops on the ground, revealing cute little faces and short legs beneath their greenish caps. Instantly, the system reveals dozens of panels, identifying all those little plants as level 1 creatures. The Prota is completely tight-lipped to discover that those decorative plants were actually native monsters hidden there the entire time. However, before he can celebrate the arrival of the new inhabitants, something extraordinary catches his attention further ahead in the cave. The massive, sealed golden door begins to emit an even stronger and more majestic golden glow. With the rank evolution finally complete, the system notifies him that the security seals have been revoked, and the mysterious passage of the Shadow Gate begins to open slowly for the young guardian. Hitoya is completely shocked to realize that the unexplored sector of the dungeon has just been unlocked following the evolution. The Prota smiles happily as he realizes that this exact news was what the little wolf pup had been trying to show him the entire time. Before the group, an immense passage illuminated by a powerful golden light opens up at the end of a path surrounded by tiny glowing mushrooms. The small green mushrooms begin to hop and move in an adorable manner around the newly opened portal. Hitoya looks at his companions and asks if they want him to go in to explore what lies behind that mysterious portal. The young man ponders that, if those little creatures are native monsters of the dungeon, then they are certainly on his side in this journey. Decided to obtain more answers about the rules of that world, the Prota resolves to move forward in the hope of learning more details about his own territory. Alongside his loyal allies, he begins to descend an immense and mysterious stone staircase that leads directly underground. Upon reaching the end of the steps, Hitoya and the monsters find themselves facing what appears to be a dead end, but the young man soon senses that something is off there. He focuses his gaze on a small mound of dirt on the ground and suspects that some secret lies buried right at that spot. At that moment, the small hopping mushrooms begin to approach the mysterious pile of dirt with curiosity. Suddenly, the friendly little creatures begin to transform their heads into small makeshift shovels. Under the astonished gaze of Hitoya and his companions, the mushrooms begin to dig into the dirt with impressive agility. The Prota is totally surprised to realize that those little creatures are digging into the ground voluntarily to help him. An intense golden glow emanates from the ground as the system announces the materialization of the reward for the forest graveyard's evolution. Before them appears a luxurious golden chest called the Sixth Sacred Ark, which the young man quickly identifies as a great treasure chest. A system message confirms on the screen that this valuable chest is the official prize for the dungeon going up in rank. Hitoya observes the gleaming chest, impressed, and thinks that the appearance of an actual treasure makes this dungeon feel even more like a video game. Ada and Yada get extremely excited at the sight of the glowing chest and already begin to celebrate the discovery of a valuable treasure. The dragons begin to theorize whether more incredible treasures like that one will continue to appear as the dungeon rises in level. However, the Prota quickly begins to ponder the dangerous consequences that the existence of a treasure could bring to his home. He becomes quite concerned upon realizing that the presence of riches will surely attract even stronger and more dangerous hunters to invade his territory. Ada and Yada suggest that they think about that later and urge him to open the chest already, while the little wolf pup celebrates excitedly with curiosity. To ensure everyone's safety, Hitoya asks his allies to step back a bit before he opens the mysterious container. The young man extends his hand toward the golden lid, filled with high expectations to discover the secret hidden inside. As soon as he opens the lid, a powerful explosion of bright golden energy illuminates the entire underground cave. The system reveals that the legendary treasure inside the chest is a mysterious accessory called the Right Hand of Prometheus. Hitoya picks up the floating item and notes that it looks very much like a golden ring with an exotic and shiny design. A holographic panel appears right after to detail the effects granted by that special accessory. Upon reading the specifications on the screen, the young master goes into shock to find that this ring possesses an active effect that is simply unbelievable. He stands completely paralyzed and perplexed before the sheer magnitude of the power contained within that small golden object. Curious about the young man's silence, the dragons ask what kind of flashy skill the item grants for dungeon battles. Hitoya looks at the glowing ring in his palm and recognizes that this extraordinary power will surely be very useful in the future. On the other hand, he fears that such an absurd force might end up dragging all his beloved monsters into an endless conflict. deciding to avoid using this power at all costs. With a serious expression, the Prota apologizes to his allies and lets them know that he cannot reveal the ring's secret to them just yet. He puts the item away while reflecting on the countless mysteries that still surround that dungeon and his own role as its guardian. The young man recalls the bizarre fact of the dungeon evolving in level, and also how a simple rank F boss was capable of shattering control collars that were supposed to be indestructible. Looking at himself, Hitoya wonders who he truly is and what the real nature of the force he carries within his spiritual body might be. Determined to find a peaceful way to protect the dungeon without relying on the dangerous power of the treasure, he suddenly hits upon a brilliant idea. With a confident smile on his face, the Prota turns to the small creatures and announces that he is going to need everyone's help. The small green mushrooms merely stare at him with completely confused looks, not understanding what the young man is planning. He explains enthusiastically that by uniting the power of the mushrooms with the rest of the group, they will be able to drastically change the way the entire dungeon operates. The young man then proposes that they all work together as a big team to build a secret hideout inside the cave. Without losing any time, the entire group begins to dig into the ground cooperatively, including the small mushrooms and the wolf pups. Next, with the help of the dragons, they pile up all the debris and boulders that had scattered after the territory's evolution. They perfectly cover the entire outer structure with branches and dense foliage, so that the hideout's entrance remains completely camouflaged within the forest. With everything finished, Hitoya displays a radiant look of pure satisfaction and pride in his new friend's hard work. He raises his arms and celebrates the completion of the work with great joy, declaring that their new hideout is officially finished. A new holographic map is displayed on the screen, showing the strategic location of the hideout right next to the shadow gate and the pile of debris that protects the main entrance. The Prota thanks everyone from the bottom of his heart for their collaboration, while the dragon heads hide their shyness by saying they didn't help just to receive thanks. Ada and Yada look at the new construction with delight and ask if they can go inside the house already, receiving a highly positive response from their master. Once inside, Hitoya explains that the shelter is located right beneath the roots of the great tree, fully protected by thick dirt and stone, so that no fire attacks or blades from the outside can reach them there. To make everything even safer, the Prota shows that the place also features a secret emergency passage that serves as an escape route to the deep parts of the forest. The inside of the hideout is a bit dark and chilly, but it transmits an inexplicable sense of peace and security to anyone who enters. The dragons and the wolf pups soon lie down on the dirt floor, feeling that this underground corner is incredibly cozy for resting. Hitoya comforts his small allies by guaranteeing that they will be protected there, even if something terrible happens outside, wishing everyone an excellent night's sleep. It doesn't take long for the entire pack of little wolves and the other native monsters to drift into a deep and peaceful sleep, scattered across the floor illuminated by the mushrooms. While watching them sleep, the Prota reflects that despite still having many worries on his mind, he wants to believe the dungeon's evolution serves precisely to create a home where everyone feels welcome. He remembers how things worked in his old life on Earth, where going up in rank or getting promoted meant nothing more than entering an endless competition, with infinite goals that never brought true happiness. However, the young man realizes that the rules of this new world are a bit different because the more he fights and strives to level up, the stronger he becomes to face any threat that appears in his path. And his greatest motivation to accumulate this power is knowing that this strength serves solely to protect the lives of all his dear companions. Thinking about keeping his guard up, Hitoya decides to quietly step out of the hideout to patrol the surroundings, knowing that new dangers could arise at any moment. However, even with all the young man's care not to make any noise, one of the dragons discreetly opens its eyes and watches him walk away. Upon exiting the emergency tunnel and breathing the fresh air of the dense forest, the Prota is relieved to see that the escape route is perfectly clear. The young man approaches a serene creek to refresh his feet in the clean water flowing over the stones, but he is caught by surprise by the sound of footsteps in the water right behind him and turns around, intrigued to see what it is. To his surprise, Ada and Yada also came out of the hideout and are now walking calmly through the quiet waters of the creek. Hitoya notices that Ada seems to carry a rather thoughtful expression and quickly asks what is bothering his faithful winged companion. The two-headed dress stares at him with seriousness, showing an unusual shyness before gathering the courage to speak what it feels. With a hesitant tone, the creature asks directly why the young master goes to such lengths and sacrifices so much to protect mere monsters like them. Yada compliments his brother's question by asking what the young man truly is, leaving the Prota completely flustered by that flurry of direct questions. The dragons admit they would like to know more about their master's past, questioning if he has a family and what they were like in his old life. Faced with the question of whether his relatives looked like him, Hitoya's eyes widen as he is confronted with memories he hasn't visited in a long time. The young man scratches his cheek sheepishly and tries to find the right words to explain his true origin story. He sits by the riverbank and reveals that his parents were ordinary human beings, even if nowadays he has assumed the intimidating appearance of a monster. While looking up at the starry sky, the prota begins to retrieve the oldest memory he keeps from his childhood in the previous world. He remembers when he was just an abandoned and starving little boy, shivering from the cold in a dark alley during a harsh winter night. It was at that moment of despair that a generous hand reached out in his direction, changing the course of his destiny forever. Even amidst life's difficulties, that kind couple always told the little boy that he would be safe and protected by their side. Radiant with happiness, the little orphan could finally experience the warmth of a home and the joy of calling two people mom and dad. The prota recalls with affection that even without sharing the same blood or physical features, those two welcomed him with open arms and gave him all the love in the world. However, that happiness was brutally cut short when a devastating natural disaster struck the city where they lived. Hitoya's childhood home ended up completely buried under the rubble, and his beloved adoptive parents unfortunately never returned from that tragedy. Looking into the eyes of his allies, the young man ponders that he and his parents did not look alike physically, but the generous way they lived left an eternal mark on his heart. He explains that since that sad day, his greatest wish in life became to pay back the kindness he received in the past. Hitoya smiles tenderly as he reveals that he always dreamed of living the same way his parents did, offering protection and a safe haven for those who need help the most. The little wolf pup rubs affectionately against the young man's arm to comfort him, making the master thank the gesture and reassure him that everything is fine now. Ada observes the young man with a look full of admiration and deep respect after hearing that moving story of resilience. Although the dragon still doesn't comprehend the origin of the master's mysterious level, or where his power to break subjugation collars comes from, it feels that it finally understands the real reason Hitoya protects that dungeon with such dedication. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to the imposing setting of the capital, where a gigantic skyscraper with a futuristic dome stands out on the horizon during sunset. Inside the east wing of the city's underground research laboratories, a mysterious scientist analyzes some official correspondence sent to the facility. The man reads with mockery a formal petition coming from the Lord of the Eastern Capital, who requests a thorough investigation with the goal of completely destroying a rank F dungeon, known as the Forest Graveyard. Lounging comfortably on his couch, the gray-haired researcher lets out a bored sigh, but admits that reading letters from dull bureaucrats from time to time can bring some interesting surprises. With an enigmatic smile on his face, he mutters to himself that this elimination request is an unexpected turn of events. The scientist stands up and walks toward his shelves, packed with potions and test flasks, declaring that he is going to love studying every single secret of that bizarre dungeon in detail. Far from there, the stone entrance of the forest graveyard rests silently amidst the trees as the last rays of sun disappear into the horizon. Suddenly, a violent and thunderous tremor shakes the quiet forest floor, echoing through all the stone galleries. In the depths of the cave, Hitoya and his allied monsters are caught completely off guard by the powerful seismic shock that shakes the hideout's walls. A red system alert flashes on the screen, indicating the presence of challengers in the dungeon, revealing that a new group of heavily armed warriors has just breached the territory after weeks of calm. Ada and Yada feel the strong vibration in the walls and realize with alarm that a new group of challengers has just invaded the dungeon. Showing total serenity, Hitoya calms his companions and lets them know that he will take care of intercepting the invaders himself. The young man sprints at high speed toward the entrance, determined to protect his home and all the friends who live under his care. The hunters are caught off guard mid-journey when the imposing dungeon boss drops from the ceiling like a lightning bolt right in front of them. Upon identifying the young man as the supreme guardian of the territory, all 6 invaders activate their respective combat skills all at once to attack him. Hitoya analyzes his opponents with his eyes glowing in a cyan hue and notices that the average level of the challengers breaching the area has indeed gone up quite a bit. Without letting himself be intimidated by the number of adversaries, the prota takes a deep breath and prepares to counterattack in a strategic and measured fashion. He vows that he will win that battle to keep his friends safe and immediately activates the powerful cleaving earthquake technique. With his gaze locked in, the young man channels all of his magical energy to deliver the devastating blow against his adversaries. He remembers how the former leader of the Dragon Raiders used that very same destructive technique to terrorize his victims. Now using the defeated enemy's strength to defend his home, Hitoya unleashes a gigantic shockwave that makes the entire cave structure tremble violently. The invaders fall into absolute panic upon recognizing that the dungeon boss is using the exact same signature move of the feared Alvara. Seeing the ground collapse beneath their feet, the group leader yells desperately for everyone to dodge the colossal impact immediately. An overwhelming explosion of bluish energy consumes the entire passage, pulverizing the stone floor and throwing the warriors far away. One of the hunters is launched violently backward by the force of the tremor, realizing that this monster's power is completely off the charts. Left with no other alternative to survive the cave-in, the adventurers activate a movement technique called Celestial Swim to retreat in a hurry. Towering in the middle of the dust, Hitoya firmly orders the intruders to turn around and return to their world immediately. He delivers a final and severe warning, letting them know that the next time they attempt to breach his sanctuary, he will not hesitate to strike them down with lethal force. Utterly intimidated, the adventurer's commander orders a general retreat and activates escape magic to open the dungeon's exit portal. While fleeing, one of the warriors complains in frustration that returning empty-handed means they won't get paid for the mission. But another companion smiles knowingly and guarantees that won't be an issue, revealing that he managed to carry out a small metallic device in his hand. The strange metal object is shaped like a fish and features sinister red eyes that glow like recording lenses. Suspicious of the floating artifact the invaders left behind, Hitoya quickly activates his Vision +10 skill to investigate the item. With his senses sharpened, the young man realizes that it is not a living creature, but rather a small robotic fish functioning as a spy camera. He concludes with concern that this time, the goal of those intruders wasn't simply to loot or clear the dungeon. The golden portal closes completely in absolute silence, leaving the Proto alone at the immense entrance of the sanctuary. The young man remains thoughtful, trying to decipher what those mysterious invaders were truly trying to spy on in his territory. Suddenly, a series of system notifications flashes before his eyes, causing the young man to let out an exclamation of surprise. Thanks to the successful escape of the challengers, his rebirth system is activated and automatically absorbs 5 new combat techniques from the runaways. Hitoya looks at the list of newly acquired skills and reflects that, although he doesn't know what dangers await him, he needs to prepare for the worst. He clenches his fist with determination, comforted by the fact that he now possesses many more defensive options to protect his home. Ada and Yata land right after and congratulate their master on the excellent job, impressed by the speed with which he wrapped up the fight. Radiant at the arrival of his faithful winged friends, Hitoya greets them with a big smile on his face. Mid-conversation, a spark of curiosity flashes in the young master's mind as he remembers one of the techniques he just inherited from the warriors. Enveloped in an aura of bluish energy, the young man decides to test out the mechanics of one of those newly acquired skills right away. To the dragon's astonishment, Hitoya activates Celestial Swim and begins to float upside down in mid-air as if he were actually swimming. The little creatures are amazed to see that their boss has now also learned to fly so freely. However, the young man's excitement is short-lived as he suddenly loses his balance and begins to plunge clumsily. With a startled cry, the Proto falls headfirst into the middle of a bush covered in green leaves. Concerned about the sudden accident, Ada and Yata dive quickly into the foliage to check if their master ended up hurting himself. Hitoya lets out an awkward laugh while dangling his legs from a tree branch, admitting that perfectly mastering a brand new technique right on the first try is quite a difficult task. After recovering, he floats gently and explains that the sensation is wonderful, as if he could glide fluidly through the air, using nothing but the momentum of his own body. Curious about the power dynamics of that world, the young man asks the dragons at what age they first began to manifest their magical skills. The two-headed dragon responds calmly that they already knew how to use their breath techniques, right after popping out of their eggs. Hitoya is slack-jawed to learn that they were already born with those powers and wonders if all monsters in that world operate the same way. The creature explains that not all beings are like that, citing as an example the native wolf pups of that forest, who are born without any kind of special power. Intrigued by that revelation, the Proto questions if the same principle applies to humans, and if there are people who are also born with special skills. The dragons respond categorically that only monsters possess the gift of being born with combat techniques inside their bodies. They add that without the aid of artificially created magical tools, human beings are completely incapable of casting any kind of skill. Hitoya finally understands why disarming the hunters during battles neutralize their powers, realizing that human skills are stored within the weapons themselves, and that such equipment functions as the magical tools of that world. Ada and Yata explain that magical tools are actually created through the processing of monsters that possess skills, using the creatures themselves as raw material. Upon hearing that terrifying revelation, Hitoya is left completely perplexed and speechless. The Proto realizes that all those weapons he broke during previous battles were actually once living beings that belonged to the same species as his allies. He enters a state of deep shock as he deduces that, without knowing it, he spent all this time destroying the bodies of other innocent monsters. Seeing the young master's despondent expression, the dragon tries to reassure him with affection, and says he is far too kind to carry that unnecessary guilt. The creature adds that the terrible manufacturing process requires monsters as a base, and that putting subjugation collars on dungeon inhabitants is the method humans use to transport them to the outside world. The dragon remembers with sadness how the warriors would capture the beasts by force to take them far away from their natural habitats. Thus, magical tools are nothing more than defenseless monsters that could never return home, being condemned to serve humans even after passing away. Ada consoles the young man, saying that by destroying those weapons in battle, he was actually setting the souls of those creatures free, making Hitoya sincerely hope that this theory is true. With this more comforting perspective, the young master's expression finally softens with a slight sense of relief. The young man reflects that although there are countless terrible tragedies scattered throughout that world, that he still knows absolutely nothing about, he will do everything in his power to use his current strength to protect the allies who live with him inside that dungeon. Far from there, in the sumptuous palace of the eastern capital, Professor Eleni Tulin lets out a mocking laugh upon learning that the group of adventurers failed miserably to defeat the dungeon boss. With a mysterious smile, the scientist comments that the failure of those warriors only gives him the perfect reason to pay a personal visit to the eastern capital. The corrupt Lord Pedro Detlas also follows the report, and grumbles with contempt about the incompetence of the soldiers who were sent for the scouting mission. However, the nobleman soon flashes a greedy smile and celebrates the fact that he is a lucky man to count on such a formidable ally. He is extremely pleased to see that his request for the destruction of the forest graveyard was accepted by one of the most brilliant men in the kingdom. This renowned scientist is Professor Elaine Tulin, a genius of underground research who now holds the small robotic fish that served to spy on Hitoya's dungeon. The researcher plays with the small floating mechanical device, which returns gently to the palm of his hand. He projects the images captured by the robot into the air and confirms with satisfaction that the recordings of the dungeon boss's combat turned out perfect. Pedro Detlas observes the projections, fascinated, and admits in surprise that despite being the lord of that great city, he had never seen an item with such mysterious properties before. He asks in disbelief if that floating screen with descriptive words is another one of the brilliant inventions created by that warrior. Tulin turns off the holographic projection of Hitoya and declares that the preliminary scouting of that peculiar dungeon is fully completed. With a confident look, the scientist lets the Lord know that the next steps of the operation they planned are already very clear. Pedro Detlas locks his gaze on the researcher and asks curiously what strategy they will adopt from now on. With an enigmatic smile, Tulin reveals that the next stage will consist of an on-site investigation directly inside enemy territory. He guarantees that he will thoroughly study every corner of that intriguing dungeon to shortly after destroy it definitively. Back at the forest graveyard, Hitoya enjoys himself up in a large tree with his friends and comments that the little wolf pup seems to love the sensation of flying with them. But the quiet atmosphere is abruptly interrupted when the dungeon system triggers an urgent red invasion alert. With his eyes wide, the Proto quickly orders Ada and Yada to hide the little wolf because new challengers have just crossed the portal. The young master runs toward the main gate, wondering apprehensively what kind of warriors he will have to face this time. The system continues to emit audio warnings of imminent danger, while the great stone passage shakes with the presence of the intruders. Hitoya floats silently to the dungeon entrance and looks around, intrigued at not spotting absolutely anyone in the clearing. The scene before his eyes remains completely deserted, and in a rather suspicious silence. Hidden behind some bushes, the guardian sweeps the area with his gaze, and finds the total absence of any warrior at the location strange. He begins to suspect that the invaders are concealed at some point outside his field of vision, when suddenly a mysterious voice echoes right behind his back, asking if he is the dungeon boss. Startled by the sudden presence, the young man dodges quickly and tries to locate where that unfamiliar voice came from. In mid-air, a silhouette enveloped in water bubbles begins to materialize magically before the guardian. The invader reveals himself as Professor Elaine Tulin, who floats elegantly upside down and greets the young master mockingly. Hitoya is left in a complete state of shock to witness a human appear before him, literally out of nowhere. The young man backs away defensively upon realizing that he has never seen that camouflage skill before, and panics as he notices that the system shows no status window for his opponent. Watching the man land gently on the ground, the proto recognizes apprehensively that he has never faced an opponent with that kind of enigmatic presence. With his eyes glowing cyan, the young master demands to know who the invader is and what the real purpose of his unexpected visit is. Tulin adjusts his dark glasses and responds mockingly that he only came to clear the dungeon, asking directly where the young man is hiding its valuable treasure. Hitoya immediately recalls his previous concern that the existence of that reward chest would end up attracting greedy enemies to his home. He bites his lips tensely as he confirms that the main target of that mysterious scientist is indeed the dungeon's 6th sacred arc. The researcher advances calmly and declares that his true ultimate goal at this location is to carry out a total elimination of the dungeon. The Guardian becomes quite confused and apprehensive at the weight of those words, not understanding the real meaning of a total elimination. Tulin glares at him with a cold look and asks if the young master is truly unaware of the rule that if a dungeon loses its main treasure, it ceases to exist and completely vanishes from the map of that world, leaving the Proto in an absolute state of panic at the revelation. Tulin explains that as soon as the sacred relics fall into the hands of a human challenger, the rules of that world extract a terrible price from the entire dungeon. He reveals cruelly that the territory's role comes to an end, and the entire dungeon collapses, causing all the native monsters living there to vanish and perish along with it. The scientist emphasizes that the destruction of the forest graveyard is absolute and literal, treating that tragedy as a mere natural rule of that world's operation. Overcome by an overwhelming fury, Hitoya clenches his fists and vows with all his might that he will never allow such a catastrophe to happen to his friends. Elaine Tulin lets out a mocking smile and says he already expected that aggressive reaction from the master, releasing several small fish-shaped magical tools from his sleeves. As his opponent advances, the Proto reacts quickly and delivers a sharp wind strike to try to destroy his adversary's spy devices. Several sharp blasts of energy are fired at the scientist, who merely watches the attacks fly toward him without showing any reaction of fear. Noticing that the enemy carries a large number of small projectiles around him, the young man decides to shift his strategy to try to reduce the number of targets once and for all. He expertly dodges the metallic fish and activates his curved blade technique to deliver fast, precise slashes through the air to slice up his opponent's weapons. On the other side, Professor Tulin merely waves his hand calmly and comments ironically that he had already foreseen every step of that defensive move. Under the impact of the energy blades, the spy tools are sliced into pieces and fall scattered through the cave's air. However, to the young man's surprise, the metallic pieces begin to fuse and magically regenerate in midair. Hitoya panics upon noticing that the robotic weapons rebuilt themselves on their own, and that his ordinary cutting attacks seem to have no effect against them. Floating majestically surrounded by his ingenious fish, Tulin ironizes the situation, asking if the young master is not very good at dealing with that type of opponent. The Proto finds himself totally cornered, not knowing how to face an enemy who possesses total immunity against physical cuts and direct attacks. Suddenly, a monstrous jaw emerges from the shadows and begins to concentrate a massive sphere of freezing energy. A powerful breath of ice is fired from above, instantly freezing all the air around the invading scientist. Hitoya looks up, surprised to notice that he received allied help right at the moment he was in a pinch. The freezing attack hits Tulin dead on and traps him within a thick layer of crystalline ice, revealing itself as Ada's opening onslaught. Ada appears flapping his wings at the cave ceiling, executing his hue and hail flame technique, while warning the intruder furiously not to lay a single finger on his boss. But to everyone's astonishment, the scientist breaks the ice with extreme ease and recognizes the two-headed dragon that used to belong to the former raiders, mockingly advising them not to try anything too dangerous. Yada takes the lead of the attack and fires his Cayenne warp flame technique in an attempt to carbonize the enemy with a breath of extreme heat. However, the invader dodges the fire attack with a nimble movement, causing the dragon to lose its balance in the air for brief moments. Ada and Yada snarl with deep hatred at the ease with which their adversary manages to repel and dodge all of their elite spells. Professor Tulin floats back into the air calmly, observing the two dragons with a rather intriguing scientific curiosity. Upon focusing his eyes on the beast's two heads, the researcher notes with intrigue that the subjugation collars that were supposed to control them have vanished completely. He fixes his gaze with extreme intensity and asks directly how those creatures managed to break free from that absolute spell. With an excited smile on his face, the man questions how monsters enslaved by the dragon raiders managed to rip off their indestructible control collars. The two dragon heads merely stare at him with fierce looks of pure hostility, refusing to answer any of the enemy's questions. Tulin floats a bit further away, mockingly regretting that the beasts are not willing to have a friendly chat with him. But before he can relax, The proto charges from the shadows like a bluish lightning bolt to deliver a surprise counterattack. Hitoya executes the elite Phantom Strike technique with determination to deliver an invisible, ultra-fast onslaught against his adversary's chest. The researcher dodges the impact at the last second and praises the young man mockingly, commenting that the young master can truly pull off some pretty scary things in battle. Hitoya positions himself in front of his loyal dragons and warns the scientist with a glaring look of pure determination to stay far away from his precious friends. Elaine Tulin adjusts his glasses coldly and says the young man seems to need some rest time, declaring that this little display of power was already enough for today. The researcher slowly dissolves into a mist of magical bubbles and vanishes into thin air, bidding farewell with a mocking smile as the dungeon portal closes. The Proto and the dragons look around, confused by the invaders' voluntary withdrawal, while the system panel confirms that the number of challengers has cleared out once more. Hitoya tries to activate his passive rebirth skill to copy the techniques of the scientist who just fled his territory, but notices in surprise that nothing happens on the system screen. An error notification flashes in red to warn the young man that there is no new skill available to be absorbed from that opponent. He panics upon discovering that he was completely unable to copy that mysterious invader's techniques, failing to understand the reason for the failure, since his power is supposed to absorb the skills of any defeated or runaway challenger. The young master reflects that according to his dungeon's evolution rules, defeating more enemies should grant more skills to make him strong enough to defend his home from any threat. But he realizes with anguish that advancing in rank will not stop the arrival of even more dangerous adversaries, and that he remains without knowing the status and techniques of that new scientist. Hitoya bites his lips apprehensively as he focuses on the image of the scientist's face in his thoughts, knowing full well that Elaine Tulin does not look like any conventional adversary he has faced before. In the corrupt lord's mansion in the eastern capital, Tulin reveals to Pedro Detlas that he changed his mind and intends to carry out another far more interesting task before destroying that dungeon for good. Pedro Detlas stares at him with a confused look and asks the researcher if something extraordinary happened during the secret investigation in the cave. With a wicked smile, the genius explains that his new intentions involve purely scientific goals for his private research. He reveals that he wishes to capture the legendary two-headed dragon living in that dungeon alive, since eliminating the territory now would cause all native monsters to vanish along with it. The greedy lord rubs his hands with malice and enthusiastically agrees with the idea, asking for the scientist to also bring the dungeon boss as a capture prize. The nobleman brags, saying that the young guardian would certainly be sold for a fortune, as an extremely rare material on the human black market. The scientist stares at him with a cold, piercing look, guaranteeing the lord that they can provide as many tools and subjugation rings as necessary to conclude that lucrative hunt once and for all. Elaine Tulin warns Pedro Detlas to just stay out of his way during the entire dungeon operation. The greedy lord immediately agrees with a flattering smile on his face. He praises the scientist's skills, pointing out that he was able to defeat the great dragon that wiped out the ancient dragon raiders. While looking at the massive trophy on the wall, Pedro Detlas proudly emphasizes that Tulin is the legendary man who hunted down that colossal creature. Meanwhile, inside the dungeon, Hitoya worriedly looks at the golden chest containing his territory's valuable treasure. The guardian recalls the invader's warning that his home will cease to exist if that sacred relic is stolen. Touching the glowing golden item, the young master apprehensively confirms that losing the treasure will cause the complete collapse of his entire home. With a firm gaze, Hitoya determinedly declares that they can never allow the enemy to get their hands on that object. The dungeon map perfectly illustrates the strategic division between the Allies' hideout, the treasure room, and the entrance gate where the invaders will try to break through. Suddenly, the red system screen flashes frantically with an alarm sounding, warning that new challengers have just been detected in the territory. Perched high in a tree, Hitoya bites his lips anxiously, realizing that the dreaded invaders have finally arrived. From the dungeon's entrance portal, powerful beams of golden light are violently fired into the forest. The guardian quickly dodges the energy projectiles cutting through the air, shocked by the overwhelming power of that surprise attack. Floating calmly inside his water bubbles, Elaine Tulin appears before the young man and greets him, saying it is very good to see him again. Hitoya glares at him furiously and asks if he really came back to try and steal the sacred treasure, triggering the dungeon's collapse. With a cynical smile, the scientist reveals that his true goal today is to capture a test subject for his biological research. The MC's eyes widen in complete shock as he realizes what his opponent is plotting with his mechanical tools. To the young master's astonishment, the enemy's robotic fish begins to grow at an alarming rate until it transforms into a colossal creature. The massive creature charges at high speed toward the young man, swallowing him whole in a devastating strike. Trapped in a confined space, Hitoya panics as he realizes he is locked inside a shield-shaped magical barrier. On the outside, Tulin displays a glowing red subjugation ring and mockingly asks where the two-headed dragons are hiding. Watching the glowing relic from inside his prison, the young master terrifiedly recognizes the dreadful mind control rings. The young man bitterly recalls that these cursed devices force absolute, cruel obedience upon any monster enslaved by humans. Overcome by an overwhelming fury, Hitoya builds up his wind energy and swears with all his might that he will not let the enemy win. Determination driving him as he activates his wind blade technique, the guardian shouts that he will never allow his precious friends to suffer through that terrible enslavement again. Meanwhile, in the dark depths of the forest cemetery, a mysterious warrior armed with a spear sneaks through the shadows. The soldier smiles maliciously as he holds his weapon, proudly commenting that everything is going exactly as Master Elaine Tulin predicted. He explains that, according to the plan, Tulin is drawing focus by going after the two-headed dragons to serve as a distraction. Meanwhile, he will secretly slip through the shadows to steal the dungeon's valuable treasure. The warrior marches with firm steps toward the heart of the territory, confident that this invasion plan will be an absolute success. However, deep inside the camouflaged shelter, little Lobinho's ear twitches as he catches a strange sound coming from outside. The small pup lies down at the entrance of the underground hideout, looking around quite puzzled by the sudden change in the atmosphere. He begins sniffing the air with extreme focus, trying to pinpoint any unknown threat that might be approaching his home. Through the forest foliage, the menacing silhouette of the spear-wielding warrior appears, walking straight toward the refuge. Lobinho's eyes widen in complete shock as he spots the terrible invader closing in on where everyone is hiding. The pup trembles with fear, noticing that his little mushroom companions and the other wolf pups are completely defenseless against that threat. Breaking into a cold sweat and terrified, the little pet squeezes his eyes shut in the face of the imminent danger. But he immediately remembers Hitoya's firm order that they could not allow anyone to steal the dungeon's precious treasure. Inspired by his leader's courage, the brave Lobinho paws the ground with determination and decides to face the danger head-on. The little wolf lets out a brave roar and dashes out of the hiding spot to protect his friends, determined to fight with everything he has. Back on the main battlefield, the magical barrier trapping the MC begins to crack under the immense pressure of his spiritual energy. With an overwhelming explosion of power, Hitoya shatters the spherical shield completely, breaking free from the scientist's trap. Tulin just smiles calmly, surrounded by his mechanical fish, and comments that he will first need to restrain the young master properly. In response, the guardian leaps into the air and unleashes a massive, sharp shockwave of wind against the opponent's fleet of floating devices. With a piercing gaze of pure determination, the young man vows to tear apart every single subjugation ring he comes across. Floating elegantly, Tulin scoffs at the young master's promise, claiming it is biologically impossible for a monster to break the control chains forged by humans. Hitoya charges fiercely through the air, shouting back that he himself destroyed Ada and Yada's rings, as well as the Supreme Dragon's spell. He recalls with deep sorrow the suffering of his loyal friends when they were slaves, explaining that he simply could not bear to see them mistreated in such a cruel way. Hearing that unbelievable revelation, Elaine Tulin completely loses his ironic composure and stares at the young man with a serious, shocked expression. The researcher grits his teeth in tension, utterly perplexed, and asks if the MC truly managed to break those indestructible subjugation rings all on his own. Elaine Tulin reflects with intrigue on how this bizarre dungeon holds such a mysterious guardian, one capable of breaking an absolute subjugation spell that had never been undone in all of history. With his thoughts racing, the scientist realizes that his true primary target should never have been the dragons, but the dungeon boss himself. Hitoya presses forward furiously, trading blows, demanding to know why humans keep insisting on using such terrible control tools. The young master points out that the subjugation rings are not simple collars, but cruel devices created solely to ruthlessly enslave both the bodies and hearts of monsters. Overcome with hatred for such cruelty, the guardian grits his teeth tightly, gathering even more energy to push his assault further. With that, he temporarily backs away to gain some distance, while Tulin merely responds calmly, saying he understands his fury perfectly well. The scientist coldly adjusts his sunglasses, staring at the young man with a calculating gaze, while holding his reddish ring firmly. Suddenly, a desperate howl echoes from a distance, piercing through the silence of the deep woods. Hitoya immediately stops his charge, recognizing little Lobinho's howl of pain. The guardian panics, realizing that something truly awful has just happened to his most vulnerable friends in the heart of the forest. Sensing the young man's hesitation, Tulin flashes a wicked smile and asks if he plans to run off to save his little pet. Searing with a cold sweat, the young master bites his lip, torn between continuing the fight against the scientist or rescuing his monster family. But his priority will always be to protect everyone, making the MC dash off at high speed toward the cry for help. Watching the young man flee, Tulin reflects with fascination that he has finally found the legendary power capable of breaking control rings, and now he just needs to figure out a way to capture him alive. Meanwhile, a frightened Lobinho cries out in pain as he tries to desperately run through the thick vegetation. The pup runs without looking back, fleeing from a massive, terrifying presence that is ruthlessly hunting him down. The invading hunter smiles with extreme malice, praising the little creature's good nose for managing to detect him even while he was so well hidden. He reveals himself to be Ronsolo Lopez, a dangerous level 61 Lancer, who laughingly declares he will use the poor pup as the first test subject to measure the power of his new magical weapon. Facing the colossal warrior, the defenseless Lobinho trembles with terror, tears in his eyes, completely cornered against the ground. But just as the spear comes down for the decisive strike, Hitoya appears like a flash of lightning and blocks the attack with his own body. The Guardian stares at his opponent in surprise, confirming that there was indeed another dangerous warrior secretly covertly infiltrating his territory. Hitoya takes a protective stance in front of Lobinho and furiously orders the invader to back away from the pup, declaring that he will be his real opponent now. With a wild look in his eyes, Ronsolo Lopez gets extremely thrilled to realize he is facing the dungeon boss himself, activating his skills and saying it will be a blast taking him down. The young master quickly orders Lobinho to run away while dodging the fast and deadly strikes of the spear, which is wrapped in purple flames. The two trade violent attacks, causing intense explosions of light and dust all across the forest clearing. Ronsolo spins his weapon with impressive mastery, forcing the Guardian to constantly fall back to avoid getting hit by the sharp tip. Hitoya tensely realizes he cannot use his large-scale destructive techniques here, as he might end up hurting his own allies or ruining the forest. He grits his teeth in worry, noting that he is facing an extremely experienced warrior whose spear strikes are incredibly fast and heavy. The opponent presses forward with another series of precise thrusts, while a dark mist begins to spread around them. The young master focuses his sensory vision on the adversary's weapon, trying to unravel the secret behind such an unusual power. As he observes the grim details on the tip of the spear, a strange and highly uncomfortable feeling of familiarity washes over him. Suddenly, Hitoya recalls the appearance of the legendary Supreme Dragon he had previously faced and set free. He is completely horrified to remember that human hunters' magical tools are created through a monstrous monster processing method. The Guardian shakes with pure indignation, recalling that hunters use living monsters with rare abilities as mere crafting materials. With his eyes wide in panic, the MC realizes with horror that the cursed spear was forged using the body of the Supreme Dragon after it was hunted down. Ronsolo Lopez notices the young man's reaction and gives a diabolical grin, asking if he finally realized that he was the one who took down that colossal creature. The warrior proudly boasts about his new magical weapon, cruelly revealing that the more he hunts other monsters, the stronger and more destructive his spear becomes. Mockingly, he ironically thanks the young master for delivering such excellent quality material to craft his perfect gear. Feeling his chest burn with rage upon realizing that freeing the Supreme Dragon ended in its demise and transformation into a weapon, Hitoya grits his teeth, while the psychopath laughs in his despairing face. The Lancer continues his insane speech, declaring that he lives only for wealth, absolute power, and the pure adrenaline of taking lives. Ronsolo grits his teeth with a sick smile stretching from ear to ear, shouting with sadism that monster hunting is the only thing that never gets old. Overcome by a divine fury, Hitoya steps forward without hesitation and grabs the sharp tip of the spear directly with his bare hand, which is cloaked in cyan energy. The invading warrior is left in absolute shock to see his most powerful weapon stopped so brutally by the Guardian's raw physical strength. Ronsolo Lopez steps back in fear, unable to comprehend how the monster before him possesses such crushing destructive power in his bare hands. The young master clenches his free fist with determination and hatefully declares that the great dragon's final wish was simply to save his suffering companions. The young man states with authority that by destroying a magical tool, he will finally be freeing the soul of the creature trapped within, swearing he will never allow that power to keep being used to slaughter other monsters. With his eyes glowing with a menacing tone of fury and cyan power, Hitoya roars from the bottom of his soul, promising to smash that cursed spear right before his eyes. With an ultra-fast movement, the Guardian delivers a devastating punch straight into the metal frame of the enemy's weapon. Ronsolo grinds his teeth, straining with everything he has to contain the impact, haunted by the fact that his opponent is using such overwhelming physical power, without even activating a special combat skill, To the invading Lancer's absolute terror, deep cracks begin to ripple all over the blade of his precious magical spear under the impact of Hitoya's blow. Hitoya nimbly executes a backflip, dodging Roncelo's heavy lunging strike. Thoroughly frustrated and sweating cold, the invader grits his teeth, unable to accept the humiliation of failing to clear a low-rank dungeon. The warrior looks up with a maddened expression, screaming with all his might that such a defeat is absolutely impossible. With that, Hitoya notices in surprise that his opponent suddenly turned around and started running into the deep woods. The invader leaps through the tree canopies in a desperate escape, closely pursued by the fast guardian. Hitoya scans the area with a sharp gaze, trying to figure out what could be so important in that specific direction of the forest. Roncelo breaks into a diabolical smile as he spots his true target right ahead through the bushes. The young man's eyes widen in panic as he notices that the psychopath has found little Lobino cornered in the clearing. The Lancer readies his weapon with bloodlust, thinking that his spear will become even more destructive after eliminating the last monster in that territory. Desperate to save his precious friend, Hitoya screams with all his might for the pup to run away immediately. Lobino panics completely and lets out a scared whimper, unable to move in time to dodge the fatal blow coming his way. However, at the absolute last millisecond, Elaine Tulin floats gracefully down from the sky and lands right in the attack's trajectory. A heavy collision occurs in midair, leaving the MC in absolute shock at the unexpected interference. Hitoya looks up, unable to believe that the other challenger chose to step into the fight so out of nowhere. Roncelo keeps attacking furiously, insanely commanding the little creature to feel honored to serve as nourishment for his magical weapon. But to his utter surprise, one of Tulin's mechanical fish blocks the strike with ease, protecting the little pup from the spear's impact. The scientist remains floating peacefully, controlling his hovering devices with a simple wave of his hand. Completely bewildered, the MC asks himself in confusion why on earth the enigmatic Elaine Tulin just saved Lobino's life. Roncelo grits his teeth, enraged by the interference, and demands to know why the scientist is getting in the way of his perfect hunt. Tulin responds with disdain, calling the Lancer naive for believing that stacking the power of weak monsters would be enough to defeat this dungeon's boss. He coldly adds that, in the warrior's current state, staying in this cavern is a massive waste of time since he has become nothing but dead weight. The scientist flashes a sarcastic smile and cynically suggests that his guildmate should just turn around and go home. Roncelo shakes with pure hatred and humiliation at being called weak and inferior to that monster he despises so much. Knowing full well that the proud Lancer would never take that advice quietly, Tulin watches Lobino run back into Hitoya's protective arms. The scientist mutters to himself that, since Roncelo isn't strong enough to defeat the Guardian, he will be much more useful serving as a guinea pig for his own experiments. Hitoya holds the frightened pup close, while the professor decides to alter his plans, opting to drop the immediate destruction of the dungeon, to focus solely on capturing the young master. Unhinged by rage, Roncelo points his spear at the scientist and orders him with a death glare to take back every single one of those offensive words. The insane warrior vows with all his might that he will turn even his own companion into fuel to strengthen his power. He drops into a combat stance and channels an immense amount of magical energy into his spear to unleash a devastating strike against Tulin. The scientist merely treats the situation with irony, commenting with amusement on how his opponents decided to clash in the middle of the clearing. Elaine Tulin then turns to the young guardian with an easygoing smile and boldly proposes that they form a temporary combat alliance. Hitoya's eyes widen, completely confused by that absurd truce offer coming from an enemy who tried to finish him off minutes ago. The professor calmly explains that the plans for the total conquest of that territory have been officially scrapped by him. The MC keeps his guard up suspiciously, trying to figure out what the true motive is behind this bizarre twist. He bites his teeth in worry, realizing that this apparent feud between the two human conquerors might just be a well-orchestrated trap. Even so, the Guardian locks his glowing eyes on his adversaries, preparing to move at any sign of danger. Roncelo grits his teeth so hard that he breaks into a cold sweat from pure hatred, unable to accept that a scientist looks down on him as inferior to a mere low-rank Guardian. The crazed Lancer shifts his full focus back to the MC and screams that he will be the target of his wrath. He charges violently, promising to smash the Guardian to use his demise as the ultimate proof of his absolute strength. With an upward swing, Roncelo causes his dark energy to multiply into dozens of sharp thrusts toward the young master, who leaps into the air. Moving calmly away from the danger zone, Tulin floats elegantly to watch the unfolding of that destructive clash from the best seat in the house. The scientist observes with a cynical smile on his lips, while Hitoya coldly analyzes his opponent's rapid movements. The warrior lets out an insane roar and activates the Kubaika, devouring multiplication technique, to unleash a literal storm of sharp blades against his enemies. The Guardian immediately recognizes that cruel technique, furiously confirming that his opponent is indeed using the stolen power of the Supreme Dragon. Ron Solo laughs like a psychopath as he sees his spear's power expand more and more under the influence of the harvested soul's energy. He thrusts his weapon forward and shouts with sadism that he will make the relic drink every last drop of the young Guardian's blood. Dodging the barrage of energy under Tulin's calculating gaze, the young man advances with relentless agility toward his aggressor. With a gaze filled with pure determination, Hitoya vows with all his might that he won't allow his late friend's energy to keep being desecrated in such a cruel manner. The crazed warrior welcomes the challenge with open arms and points his spear upward, hoping to impale the MC, who is coming down like a blue meteor. A deafening crash echoes through the entire forest the moment the Guardian's sharp claws violently collide against the tip of the enemy's magical spear. The terrible clash of forces continues to generate a massive spiritual shockwave across the entire combat area. Ron Solo's eyes widen in pure desperation as he notices his powerful magical weapon starting to crack against his opponent's raw strength. With a final shatter, the spear's blade bursts into hundreds of metal fragments as Hitoya leaps back into the air. The young master descends gracefully in a free fall, surrounded by the glowing shards of the enemy's destroyed weapon. He reaches out his hand to catch a small glittering piece, sensing that this energy truly belonged to the late Supreme Dragon. From above, Elaine Tulin simply watches the scene in complete silence, wearing an enigmatic smile on his lips. Ron Solo drops to his knees on the ground, panting heavily from exhaustion, cursing the Guardian for ruining his perfect plan. The invader laments in utter denial over how he could be defeated so humiliatingly by a mere low-rank dungeon monster. However, consumed by the fury of his wounded pride, the warrior tightly clenches his fist and decides to resort to his last option. Ron Solo pulls several artifacts from his belt and hurls a barrage of red rings at the young master, ordering him to bow before his power. The dreadful subjugation rings fly through the air at high speed, casting an ominous and threatening red glow. Hitoya suddenly finds himself surrounded by the mind control relics, which try to bind him from all sides simultaneously. The crazed warrior screams that he will humiliate the Guardian completely before tearing him apart and turning him into basic crafting materials. With a piercing gaze, and without showing a single shred of fear, the young master gathers his wind energy to counter the assault. In a single precise and ultra-fast motion, Hitoya slashes and destroys all the subjugation rings mid-air with his magical blade. The invader is left completely paralyzed with terror as he witnesses his indestructible relics fall shattered to the ground all around him. Ron Solo gives a nervous smile while trembling in fright, whispering to himself that this should be biologically impossible. Without giving his opponent time to react, Hitoya advances like a flash of lightning and lands a devastating punch straight to the Lancer's face. Ron Solo is violently hurled against the base of a large tree, falling completely knocked out and unconscious onto the ground. As the immediate danger passes, Tulin turns his back and begins to walk calmly toward the deep mist of the forest. The enigmatic scientist adjusts his sunglasses with a look of extreme admiration and fascination for what he just witnessed. Hitoya keeps his guard up and watches him walk away, suspicious that the man might be plotting another secret move. But the scientist stops, looks back, and sincerely praises the young man, marveled to confirm that he truly can break any subjugation ring. Floating a bit closer, Tulin faces the Guardian directly and asks straight up what his true goal is in this world. The young master tensely reflects that, even though that conqueror protected Lobino and himself, it remains an undeniable fact that he tried to enslave them with those cruel collars earlier. Hitoya then fires back, asking if the scientist's ultimate goal wasn't to achieve the total conquest and complete annihilation of his dungeon. Slowly removing his sunglasses, Tulin flashes an enigmatic smile and softly replies that that task was merely his contracted job. The researcher explains that he was hired by the corrupt lord, specifically to investigate the territory, conquer the dungeon, and capture the Guardian alive. He takes a deep breath and adds with a serious look that his true personal goal is something far different from that hunting mission. Resting his hand over his chest, Tulin reveals that the grand theme of his private scientific research is something of extreme importance to his own life. To the young man's surprise, the scientist begins to unbutton the collar of his dark coat to reveal his own neck. The man reveals that his ultimate life's desire is to manage to remove his own chains that have imprisoned him since birth. The MC's eyes widen, and he lets out a gasp of absolute astonishment at the shocking revelation that appears before him. Bound deeply around that human conqueror's neck, a glowing red subjugation ring shines chillingly, perfectly embedded into his skin. Hitoya is left completely bewildered, unable to comprehend how a powerful monster hunter ended up enslaved by one of those devices. He locks his shocked gaze on his opponent's throat, trying to process the sheer bizarreness of that unbelievable situation. Tulin calmly explains that his biological father was an ordinary human, but his mother was a magical creature, making him a hybrid born between the two species. The researcher clarifies that, although he accepted the mission to capture the Guardian, his reasons for being there have completely changed. The man reveals that, as an enslaved scientist, his sole ambition is to study Hitoya's power to manage to invent a way to break the ring and finally free himself from his chains. Tulin fascinatedly declares that the MC is a precious and unique existence, ensuring that he no longer has any interest in destroying the dungeon, as long as the Guardian stays alive there. The scientist promises that he will personally handle all the reports and arrangements on the outside to keep the corrupt lord away from there, leaving the young man quite suspicious of the talk. The hybrid solemnly promises that he will not kill any monster in that territory, and that he won't complete the dungeon's conquest either. With a friendly smile, the man merely asks the Guardian to allow him to return in the future peacefully to continue his investigations. Hitoya looks at him tensely, knowing that although the scientist seems sincere, a dungeon boss must never lower his guard before a hunter. The young master reminds himself that his duty is to fiercely resist with all his might against anyone who dares to use the power of control rings. In reality, within his dark thoughts, Tulin secretly plans to win the young man's trust, just to use him as the perfect material to create a magical tool capable of shattering his own slavery collar. Suddenly, Ada appears, flapping his wings with fury at the top of the clearing, and shouts to the young master, saying they can never trust that cursed scientist. The two-headed dragon angrily warns that that man was the one heavily responsible for attacking Yada previously, pointing to him as a dangerous enemy who must be eliminated. Tulin looks at the winged beast peacefully and offers a sincere apology for the misunderstanding that occurred during their first clash in the cavern. The scientist says goodbye, floating back into the mist, humorously commenting that he would really prefer it if their next meeting didn't immediately turn into a deadly battle. Elaine Tulin walks away feeling relieved to have finally found a means to destroy the terrible slavery ring. However, deep down, the calculating researcher plans to catch the young master completely off guard in a future encounter. Ada flies beside Hitoya and asks quite irritatedly if he is really going to let that dangerous man walk away without any punishment. The Guardian watches the scientist's silhouette with suspicion, questioning whether he truly made the right call by letting him return to the outside world like that. He bitterly recalls the scientist's revelation that he was a hybrid born from the forbidden union between a human and a monster. The young man stares into space, pensive about the terrible reality that plagues the world of hybrids outside of his territory. The MC wonders if there truly are other beings like Tulin, living as slaves under the ruthless control of those magical collars. He sadly remembers the scientist's cold response, confirming that there were indeed many other victims in that exact same awful situation. The young master is horrified to recall that these hybrid beings are artificially manufactured in human laboratories to be treated as mere experiments and tools of war. Beside his loyal dragon, the Guardian bites his lips at the limitless cruelty practiced by the Monster Hunter Society. The young man sorrowfully realizes that the outside world must be 1,000 times more cruel and merciless toward creatures that are not fully human. Making a sudden decision, Hitoya raises his voice and firmly orders the scientist to hold on before crossing the portal. Then, with a sharp pull, the young master breaks off a piece of his own bluish crystal tail. The Guardian lets out a muffled groan of pain from the physical sacrifice of removing a part of his own body. Ada and Tulin's eyes widen in absolute shock, unable to believe what the young man just did right in front of them. Even injured, Hitoya holds the glowing fragment of his crystal tail firmly, his gaze loaded with pure determination. He looks at the scientist and seriously states that, if his plan was to use him as material for his liberation research, he already has what he needs. Sweating cold from the physical strain and the pain of the wound, the young master makes an effort to stay on his feet in the clearing. Taking a few steps forward under his opponent's astonished gaze, the young man extends his arm firmly. With a warm and gentle smile on his face, Hitoya offers the piece of his tail and tells the researcher to use it in his scientific experiments. Tulin stands completely frozen and perplexedly asks why the Guardian is voluntarily handing over a part of himself to the enemy. The young master calmly explains that he considers that chain-breaking power something extremely necessary to help all the other victims suffering in the outside world. The scientist watches the glowing fragment float toward him, wrapped in a water bubble, unable to hide his profound amazement. Hitoya maturely adds that his generous act has nothing to do with truce agreements or mutual interests. The MC confesses with a serene gaze that he simply couldn't turn his back and pretend he hadn't seen someone suffering under those conditions. The crystalline fragment of pure energy is gently deposited directly onto the palm of the researcher's hand. Holding the glittering relic, Tulin stares at the young man with a look of deep respect and disbelief. The scientist closes his eyes and flashes a genuine smile of gratitude, touched by the unexpected kindness of the one who was supposed to be his enemy. Hitoya smiles back with a light heart, happy to know he made the right decision to help someone in need. Seeing all that generosity, Ada makes a pouting face of pure indignation at his leader's soft heart. The dragon crosses his wings and stubbornly grumbles that he still doesn't trust that mysterious scientist one bit, receiving only an understanding chuckle from Hitoya. The creature lightly pecks his master's cheek, affectionately calling him a dummy for being so naive in battle. Tulin safely stores the crystal piece inside his magical bubble, while silently reflecting on the young man's actions. He admires the young master with great intensity, marveled to find that such a pure and benevolent creature truly exists in that hostile world. As a way to say thanks for the priceless gift, the scientist decides to reveal a crucial secret about why that dungeon is classified as unpredictable. The researcher explains that although the territory has evolved from rank F to rank E, there are only 7 dungeons in history that managed to level up, and today, none of them exist anymore. Tulin gestures calmly, explaining that just as territories have specific ranks, the rules of that world demand strict requirements from all challengers. Displaying his status window as a level 89 mage, he clarifies that each dungeon rank sets a mandatory minimum level for humans to even attempt the conquest. Hitoya and Ada stare at him with confused, chibi-styled expressions, not fully grasping the meaning of those system rules. The man gives a clear example, explaining that a rank F dungeon requires level 5 or higher to be challenged, blocking any lower-level warrior from entering. He shows that challengers who do not meet the minimum prerequisites are absolutely barred by the system, and cannot even cross the territory's entrance portal. The scientist adds that the absolute maximum level dungeon, rank SSS, requires level 999 from challengers, something no human has ever achieved in all of history. Hitoya is left in complete shock to find out that no human guild has been capable of challenging or conquering a rank SSS territory to this day. Tulin concludes by revealing that, if this unpredictable dungeon keeps evolving through 7 more stages until it reaches the top of the scale, it will become a territory absolutely impossible for humans to conquer. The MC whispers the scientist's words, his eyes shining with pure hope, fascinated by the possibility of making his home an eternal, unconquerable refuge. The researcher warns with a laugh that each new evolution will draw increasingly powerful enemies, and that the evolution journey certainly won't be easy for them. But before he finishes speaking, a massive golden glow suddenly begins to emanate from the depths of the forest cemetery. A huge system notification pops up in the air to announce that the territory's reboot and forced evolution process has been successfully initiated. Hitoya and Ada look around, marveled and dazzled by the immense curtain of golden light that begins to engulf the entire clearing. Before their amazed eyes, a colossal portal of divine energy begins to materialize, marking the start of a grand new era for the dungeon. Elaine Tulin observes the intense golden light and notices how a dungeon's level evolution system operates. The scientist fixes his gaze on something extremely surprising that appears right ahead of him. Hitoya and Ada also look upward, not understanding what that thing forming on the ceiling is. The young master is completely shocked to see the massive celestial glow taking over the place. An immense, glowing golden door materializes on the cavern ceiling, leaving the guardian paralyzed by the sight. That massive, mysterious passage hovers majestically right above their heads. Hitoya wonders in astonishment what that gigantic, newly created entrance could be. At that moment, a system screen warns that this is an unexplored area of the dungeon and that the gate is locked. The three look at the enormous floating structure while trying to process what that means. Tulin calmly explains that, behind that mysterious door, a grand hidden treasure must exist. Both the Guardian and Ada react in surprise upon hearing the word treasure. The scientist clarifies that high-rank dungeons naturally possess an extreme conquest difficulty. He details that one of the main reasons hunters fail in these conquests is the immense amount of hidden treasures these locations harbor. Hitoya tries to understand what the amount of relics has to do with the difficulty of clearing a challenge. Tulin explains that a dungeon's conquest is only finalized when absolutely all internal treasures are collected, making treasure-rich territories much harder to be fully dominated. He adds that the more riches a territory possesses, the lower the risk of collapse, which is a massive strategic advantage for the monsters living there. Suddenly, a new alert pops up before them, catching everyone's attention in the clearing. The system screen reveals that the condition to open the locked gate is to have the dungeon reach rank A. The young master is bewildered to discover that he will need to evolve his home all the way to rank A to manage to get past that entrance. Since their territory just reached rank E, this means they still need to climb 4 whole levels up the scale. Next, the system begins calculating the number of hunters who failed to conquer the forest cemetery. The scientist notices that the key to leveling up is accumulating defeated invaders, and wonders what the required quota would be to reach rank A. Using his impressive memory, Tulin recalls the logs of 3 historical dungeons that managed to reach that level and calculates the average accumulated failures they had. He concludes with a smile that the dungeon will need to defeat around 10,000 human hunters, which leaves Hitoya utterly terrified by the absurd number. Ada also grows anxious before this insane requirement, wondering how many years it will take for them to face so many people. The scientist perfectly understands their frightened reaction, commenting that reaching rank A is indeed a long and extremely arduous journey. He reminds them that this is a cruel world where humanity holds an overwhelming advantage over all other magical creatures. Tulin points out that this is the unfair and brutal reality that monsters are forced to face daily just to survive. The young master listens to everything in silence, with a very worried expression on his face. He pensively reflects that he has faced only a few dozen enemies so far, finding the 10,000 combatants milestone something surreal. However, the young man firmly refuses to let his allies fall, or to lose any other companion from his dungeon. He fills himself with determination, remembering that everyone in the territory remains alive, because he found a safe way to protect his new family. The guardian decides there is no room for despair, because he knows there will always be something within his reach left to do from now on. The youth lifts his head with an imposing and firm posture beside his loyal dragon. Seeing the young man's stance, Tulin admires the fact that he keeps moving forward without letting himself be dominated by the anger or despair of reality. The researcher fixes his gaze on the guardian, seemingly making an important internal decision at that moment. With a slight smile, the scientist comments that although it is a gigantic obstacle, that path undoubtedly represents a great shortcut. He begins his preparations, sending his swift mechanical fish to swim toward the exit portal. The scientist begins floating out of the dungeon, while carrying the unconscious body of one of the defeated invaders. He says goodbye, ensuring he will keep his word and make sure the official request for that territory's complete conquest is entirely withdrawn. Hitoya places his hand on his chest and wears a warm smile of relief for managing to resolve that situation peacefully. 7 days later, a hand slams with extreme violence against a wooden office desk. The mercenary Roncelo Lopez rants furiously about being classified as a failed hunter in a simple rank E territory, feeling deeply humiliated. The Lord of East Capital, Pedro Deathless, makes a calming gesture with his hands and asks for the enraged man to try and control himself a bit. Roncelo shouts that it is impossible to calm down face to face with such shame, and starts demanding extra financial compensation, along with the immediate restoration of his honor. However, the warrior changes his tone of voice and wears an ambitious, malicious smirk on his face. Keeping his composure, the corrupt noble calmly begins pouring an alcoholic drink into some glasses on the table. Deathless tells the mercenary to just spit out what his true demands are to put this matter to rest. The lord pretends he is merely concerned with helping to restore the hunter's reputation, while the man smiles satisfied with the opening to negotiate. The two then strike an amicable toast, and the warrior thanks the noble for his cooperation, locking in a secret deal between them. Roncelo Lopez takes a sip of his drink while trying to digest the new terms of this deal. The warrior plans to use the extra cash to buy superior magical tools and completely destroy Hitoya's territory next time. An extremely dark smile appears on the hunter's face as he anticipates his revenge. But suddenly, the glass slips from his hand and plunges toward the floor. Lopez freezes completely as he feels a terrible suffocating effect take over his body. Fallen on the floor and gasping, the hunter realizes he was crossed and curses the corrupt noble with his last breath. Pedro Deathless merely looks down at him with a cruel smile, ironically commenting that now he will no longer have to carry the weight of public humiliation. The hunter falls into absolute despair upon realizing that his greed led him straight to his end. The mercenary ends up falling lifeless onto the carpet, completely poisoned by the noble. Showing no remorse whatsoever, the ruler merely complains that that new poison ended up ruining his luxury carpet. But his startle is great when a voice coming from the shadows whispers that it witnessed the entire murder. To the lord's surprise, Elaine Tulin appears elegantly dressed in white right behind him. The scientist smiles in a relaxed manner and asks if they shouldn't also have a civilized chat. Pedro Deathless tries to hide his nervousness and apologizes to the scientist for making him witness such an unpleasant scene. The ruler justifies the act, saying that eliminating rebellious and troublesome individuals is a pretty standard practice in that line of work. Tulin agrees in an ironic tone, amused by the corrupt noble's flimsy excuse. Pedro Deathless then adopts a cautious stance and questions what the scientist truly wants to negotiate with him. Cutting right to the chase, the scientist goes straight to the point and accuses the Lord of hiding several dark secrets from the central government. The man plays innocent and asks exactly what the researcher is talking about. Tulin breaks into a confident smile before starting to expose that ruler's hidden crimes. He reveals the exact number of arrests for narcotics smuggling that the noble ignored and the billion-dollar sum that this illegal scheme pulled in. Pedro Deathless begins to sweat cold and is left totally in shock to realize that his frauds have been uncovered. The noble despairs internally upon remembering that he spent more than 30 years forging thousands of tax records without anyone from the capital ever suspecting. He looks at the young scientist, stammering, unable to understand how that would be mathematically possible. The hybrid explains that he possesses perfect sensory perception and that he never forgets anything he sees, hears, or experiences. He reveals that this is his innate birth trait called perfect memory, inherited from his origin as a rift entity. The ruler trembles with fear upon realizing that the man before him is no ordinary human, but a literal monster in disguise. Tulin holds out an official removal notice sent by the world government, warning that his bribery and money laundering schemes will no longer be tolerated. The scientist coldly comments that although that fraud seems small to the central government, the punishment for rogue criminals is usually ruthless execution. The official paperwork is tossed to the floor, landing right on the pool of blood that is starting to spread across the room. Devastated and cornered, the Lord drops to his knees on the floor as he realizes he has been completely ruined by the central government system. Meanwhile, the calm of the night falls majestically over the Rank E dungeon, the forest cemetery. Inside his territory, Hitoya is severely chewed out for having sacrificed a piece of his tail as scientific research material. Ada angrily rants that, even though the wound healed instantly, he must never repeat such craziness in his life. The young master gives an awkward bow before all his little monsters and offers a sincere apology for worrying them so much. Yada comments in an amused tone that it is the absolute first time she has seen her two-headed partner care so much about someone else. Completely flustered, the dragon tries to hide his embarrassment by shouting that he wasn't worried about the dungeon boss by any means. The young man smiles, noticing how well his loyal guardians get along, and pulls them into a warm embrace. Next, the guardian suggests they change the subject to plan out the next steps for their home's evolution. The group's grand goal now is to manage to make the forest cemetery reach the absolute peak and transform into a rank SSS dungeon. However, to level up consistently, the system requires them to cause the massive failure of thousands of invading hunters. Ada locks a thoughtful gaze on those restrictive system rules and begins to formulate a clever idea. The dragon recalls that, according to the established rules, the only way for a human to succeed in a challenge is by making it out alive with collected riches. On the flip side, an invader's failure occurs when they flee empty-handed without any treasure, or when they end up perishing inside enemy territory. Hitoya lets out a much more relieved sigh upon realizing they don't necessarily need to terminate their opponents to score points in the evolution system. However, the dragon warns that the biggest immediate issue is that this peaceful evolution process will certainly take an extremely long period. The young massacre knows that the slower their progress is, the higher the risk of suffering a mass invasion from high-ranking human warriors. The MC reflects on how skills, dungeons, level evolutions, and completions make that world look exactly like a massive video game. He focuses his thoughts on this curious logic of rules and systems that govern his new life. The youth firmly concludes that his main priority from now on is to uncover as many secrets as possible regarding the inner workings of that fantastic reality. Hitoya plans to question the scientist about the various secrets of this strange world as soon as he decides to return to the territory. Meanwhile, Elaine Tulin travels majestically through the night sky, floating atop a colossal mechanical fish. The scientist reflects that the corrupt Lord of East Capital has finally been ruined, and that he sees that perfect opening to cancel the official request for the dungeon's conquest. He fixes his gaze on the horizon, knowing that his true mission is just beginning. Tulin recognizes that the real enemy of all creatures is the unfair structure of that world, whose system was designed for humans to live by exploiting monsters. The architect responsible for creating this entire cruel and ruthless mechanism is the world government itself, headquartered in the capital. Looking at the palm of his hand, the researcher fondly observes the glowing fragment of Hitoya's crystalline tail. He silently promises himself that he will find a worthy way to repay the Guardian's massive generosity. More than a simple debt of gratitude, Tulin harbors a deep hope that the young master might be the fundamental piece, capable of completely transforming that unjust world. The scientist's gaze reflects a renewed determination as he presses on toward his destination. Elsewhere, inside a noisy tavern packed with adventurers, a rowdy drinking atmosphere runs wild. In the tavern of the East Capital's Conqueror Guild, an imposing platinum-haired warrior drinks with extreme ease while crushing his guildmates in a drinking challenge. He sets his glass on the table with boredom, finding his guildmates' tolerance incredibly weak. Suddenly, one of the men tries to liven up his boss by saying he has some pretty juicy gossip to share. The hunter reveals that the well-known leader Alvera ended up becoming a failure after having his dragon stolen by a mysterious lancer in the dungeon. The man adopts a conspiratorial tone and warns that scary rumors are floating around among adventurers regarding that specific territory. He explains that survivors report the appearance of a colossal dungeon boss, equipped with 10 tails as sharp as greatswords and gigantic fangs. While the other hunters burst out laughing, thinking the story is a ridiculous exaggeration, the Platinum Chief gets quite intrigued by the mention of an anomalous dungeon boss. He remains pensive with his back turned to his companions, ignoring the loud laughter around him. The man tries to remember the exact location of the forest cemetery, but stammers awkwardly due to the effects of the alcohol. Suddenly, with an absurdly fast and imperceptible movement, the leader draws his sword and slices the tavern's huge chandelier right in half. Everyone in the tavern is completely horrified to see the establishment's ceiling get perfectly sliced by that devastating strike. The Platinum Warrior throws an intimidating glare at the trembling hunter and asks if he finally managed to sober up after the scare. He then puts on his imposing white cloak, which bears the official emblem of the Special Forces. The hunters in the tavern begin to sweat cold as they immediately recognize the symbol printed on the warrior's back. The man reveals himself to be none other than the feared second subjugation official of the capital, Kuga Asura. Flashing a sadistic smile, with his eyes glowing red, Asura comments that an unknown dungeon with an anomalous boss sounds like the perfect hunting ground for him to have some fun.